Every year in fantasy football and in best ball, there are crazy, uncertain situations. Chaos happens. Things we couldn't predict happen. And every single time we look back and we say, man, there was a lot of uncertainty around that situation. And here today, that's what we're going to dive into. How to use some of these uncertain situations or the way the market is reacting to many different situations to your advantage in best ball tournaments to try to take home millions and millions of dollars. Here on Legendary Sickos, Spike Week, and Legendary Upside Crossover, we're going to give you all the keys to all these uncertain situations in 2023 fantasy football. Let's do it.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Pat, I wanted to kick off and get this out of the way first, that we are not going to have another 45-minute discussion on DJ Moore and the Chicago Bears as it pertains to this. I imagine the Bears will probably come up at a certain point, but for anyone that listened to Ship Chasing the other night, we basically took the first half of the entire show to discuss DJ Moore. But actually, that kind of conversation has had me thinking a lot, not just from the other night, but kind of the course of this offseason about really like how many situations every single year are like this in the just regular NFL, right? We're doing it because we're playing this crazy fantasy game or best ball game, but like coaches change and players sometimes get better or worse. Players move teams. We don't know the impact of rookies, right? There's so much that we just can't ever possibly predict. It creates all this uncertainty, but this game that we play, people are very certain that they know how these things are going to play out. And so I think kind of diving in and really talking through a lot of these situations can be super helpful, because you may have an opinion on something and that may not be a wrong opinion, but how you kind of handle that in terms of how you attack your drafts can also be very different.
For sure. Yeah. And I don't think we need to go too into DJ Moore, because you and I are both kind of in agreement on DJ Moore. So we don't have Ben Gretsch to push back on us and tell us that we're crazy for continuing to believe in a player we all like.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. So no, but we, I think there's a lot of really kind of interesting situations this year. Yesterday I was, because I think one of the things that's interesting is like some of these situations are more uncertain than we like think, like if you just look at kind of like the base rates or whatever, or like just like the fundamentals. If you're going to do like kind of a screener that kind of removed some of the emotions that we have around some of these situations, you would be like, well, this is a little more uncertain than I would have thought. Like, for example, Denver, right? Last year was pretty uncertain. New quarterback,
this is a good one.
New coach, how is he going to mesh with everybody? How's it going to work? New system, right? He's finally a guy who's played in one system his entire career with one team his entire career. And we were like, yeah, but it's not uncertain. Russ is going to crush. And, we were wrong. So the market was actually quite certain, but the situation itself was pretty uncertain. And I was kind of thinking about the Jets is maybe, a similar type of situation where we're not uncertain about the Jets. I'm drafting a lot of Breece Hall still. I mean, that's an uncertain situation. The guy's coming off an ACL tear. I'm still happy to scoop him in third. I think that, Aaron Rodgers will be a big improvement on this offense, just given how bad the quarterback play was last year. But like, I think I was Kyle Dvorchak or someone was like pointing this out. Like they literally have Nathaniel Hackett on this team. Yeah. Like it is literally the same situation, and it's very uncertain. Rodgers is old. He fell off last year after 2 MVP seasons in a row, but he did fall off. You don't like to see that from an old quarterback. And he's bringing in a bunch of new wide receivers with him. The lead running back's coming off an ACL tear, but we're not really afraid of the Jets. The Jets aren't like a super cheap team. So I think in some ways it's like, yeah, it's easy we all are in agreement about certain situations being uncertain, but I think it's helpful to think through some of the situations that like maybe are just like objectively uncertain, and we were like, yeah, but don't worry about that one.
Right. We have decided, and the whole point isn't to say like no one out there said, oh, there's some level of uncertainty around the Broncos, of course, but the market said right? 80. We have to use like what the market is saying to drive this. It doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that were like, no, I'm going to fade the Broncos. Like, if you did that, shout out to you.
Good job.
Like they didn't even have anybody
didn't.
that we were drafting on the field by the end of the season.
Hit me up next time before you nail something like that. I could use the help there.
That's what I every once in a while I message Felix, who won the DraftKings Millie a couple of years ago, because we went to high school together. We actually played high school football together. We're the same age, from a small town of 8,000 people. Kind of
they
weird.
Call that best ball town now.
Yeah. We're challenging. Where are Herzig and Liam are from? The same town in Florida. That's what we're going to be, the best ball capital of the Midwest. Is what Muscuda, Illinois, for everybody. But like he drafted. It's going to go up on the welcome to Muscuda, the best ball capital of the Midwest. But he drafted 75% Cooper Kupp, and you and I talked about it, I think, last week, where I was overweight Cooper Kupp. I did like Cooper Kupp. I was a believer of Kupp over Woods or whatever. And like, was that right, wrong? Did I just get lucky? I really have no idea. But Felix drafted like 75% Cooper Kupp. He took that massive stand. And same thing as the Broncos. I'm like, I wish somebody would have told me, like, hey, you'd like this Cooper Kupp thing. Let's maybe push our edge a little bit more. But that also was an uncertain situation.
It was, yeah.
And we had Matthew Stafford coming in to replace Jared Goff, which everybody now, that doesn't have the level of kind of risk, in my opinion, that the Russ thing did with a new coaching staff and stuff. Stafford was, to me, there was almost no chance it could go worse than it went with Goff. Of course, that's also potential a little bit of hubris from me, but I think it was just a little bit different than the Broncos situation.
Yeah,
but
what if the seasons were flipped,
Yeah.
What if he dealt with an elbow thing this year? We'd be like, oh my God, they're idiots for getting rid of Goff.
Yes. So but even all that is right to say, at that point in time, we didn't know between Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods whether one of them was the lead and the other guy was the two, or if it was just going to be, most of the times it doesn't go like one guy becomes the best guy in fantasy and the other guy fades away into nothingness. Yeah. We didn't even really totally know about the backfield and just how good the offense was going to be, just how good the team was going to be. We didn't really know a lot about those Rams, but we handled them with a different level of kind of certainty. We pushed up by the end, Woods and Kupp and everything. I believe it was Akers at that time was getting pushed up pretty good as a running back. I can't totally remember, but anyway,
yeah.
Higbee was kind of the mid-round tight end type of guy. But anyway, point being, even that, we look back and like, we would never, when we're doing like a retroactive discussion about best ball, we would never say, oh yeah, the Rams, that, we didn't really know what to do with the Rams. You look back and you're just like, yeah, they're great, Stafford, whatever type of situation. And I think it does get lost in even a lot of the situations, like you said, like the Broncos last year. That was a lot of uncertainty. And we just said, no, this is good. It's Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Look at all these wide receivers. This is great. I love them.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, because the Rams, the market was saying, like, we don't know who to pick of these guys. Maybe we're somewhat interested in the offense. I mean, you got two wide receivers that are going in like the 5-6 range, I believe, if I remember right. So it's not like they were out on the Rams, but it's like throwing up their hands a little bit. I mean, Woods and Kupp were going right next to each other. I mean, no one really knew who to pick. If you spread out your exposures, you probably did pretty well. If you tilted towards Woods, you did not. And if you took a big stand, obviously, on Kupp, it was a massive year. But the market was not really deciding winners there. Another little interesting nugget about the Broncos is that the market not only was really in on kind of the whole offense, but it was deciding winners too. Sutton was going significantly ahead of Judy.
Yeah.
He was going on like the third round. And Judy, I think, was at the end of the fourth, fifth, like the 4-5 turn, if I remember right. So like, that's a big gap. And it was also wrong, by the way. I mean, if you wanted anyone from like Judy was probably the one guy that, at least he did something down the stretch. So, and that's another parallel to the Jets, where it's not just that people are excited about the Jets. It's that, like, you definitely want Garrett Wilson and not Allen Lazard. We know for sure, like, that this running back coming off an ACL tear is going to be good. Again, I'm drafting these guys, so I'm potentially making this mistake. But it did give me a little pause, because I'm like, it's quite similar. Even Rodgers, like, he fell off last year, and now it's like, well, he's going to rebound, so don't worry about that. That's one where I'm like, maybe it's a little bit of a blind spot because there's the optimism and just like you want to see this offense with a quarterback who's like making it go, because we know how talented Garrett Wilson is, we know how talented Breece Hall is if he's healthy, but we don't always get what we want. So it made me feel like, that was the one that jumped out to me. Is like, I might be hand waving some of the uncertainty a little bit with the Jets.
Definitely. And so just super quick, I want to take I want to talk about the Jets a little bit more as one of these good examples. We'll get into a lot of our 2023 kind of most uncertain situations, or at least like most compelling uncertain situations. We may not get to shout out to the Houston Texans wide receivers. We may not get to a John Mechie versus.
I'll try to squeeze him in. I want to talk about Nico.
Which crappy Texans wide receiver do I have to draft? Is it only Nico, or my buddy sent me a screenshot of a team he drafted yesterday. He had to backdoor a CJ Stroud, Xavier Hutchinson stack, and so that's how I'm like, maybe let's just skip the stack.
At that point, just take Robert Woods or Tank Dell. I mean, Xavier Hutchinson, day 3.
Yeah, I know,
not a very good prospect.
But so maybe we won't dive too deep onto the old Texans wide receiver uncertainty, but there is a lot of uncertainty in that, right? That's just one of many situations that we don't really understand. But why, like, you might be saying, like, why the hell, why does this matter, right? Take a stand, pick your side, pray it works, and you're good. But the difference is that fantasy football, but particularly best ball, is like not really a prediction game. Like if you want to, pick the players and who's going to produce the best or who's not going to produce relative to what everyone thinks, like there's betting markets that you can, right? There's player props. If you think this player is way undervalued by the market, take his over on receiving yards, or the opposite, right? If you hate DJ Moore, you think the Bears are never going to pass, there's no way that he can produce at any form of a high level, but just take his under on his catches or his receiving yards or touchdowns or whatever. That's a prediction market. You're trying to predict that the market is wrong or right on one side. Now, of course, we have to have not necessarily stands, but we have to assess all these situations, and we all have our own opinions about how they're going to play out. I was in on the Broncos last year. I was one of those believers, right? How bad could this be? Type of a situation. But the big thing is, like, the Broncos are such a good example. When the market, and the Jets will be, when the market just says, this is uncertain, but I don't care, that has to play into your assessment.
This is uncertain, but the baseline that it's moving from was so bad. Remember the Broncos the year before, right? They had, It was like Drew Lock, and it was just disaster quarterback play and everything. So it's like, dude, I know, okay, maybe Russ is falling off a little bit, but he's better than these dudes. Like he just is. So like, we should be drafting these guys, like, I don't need to worry about, yes, I understand, he's falling off a little bit, new system, new coach, but like, it's going to be fine. And it wasn't fine at all.
And of course, that was a really low end, right? If you're putting in a range of 0 to 100, what percentile was that? It was very low, but that's the point.
It could have crushed. I mean, the uncertainty does also create upside as well. Like, although the issue with the Broncos one is that we priced those guys pretty high. We priced them like it was going to crush, which I think is sort of I think that's the thing to pay attention to, is like, how is the market pricing this? Is the market deciding that it's going to break one way or the other? And if it is, then, and not to say like, oh, we can't be a part of this, we can't, but you might want to, staking out a slightly underweight position on an uncertain offense that the market's decided is going to crush seems somewhat prudent if you can bring yourself to do it.
Exactly. I'm in the midst of finally finishing up a piece. I know you have mentioned kind of going through this as well. You sit down to write something, right? First world problems. Sit down to write something, and you start, you get deep into this thing, and you uncover a new subject or an interesting idea from within there. And this happens to me all the time.
This is how I wrote my tight end article. I don't think I'm ever going to finish the article that started the tight end article, by the way. I don't think it's that good.
That's where I am at. I started something, then I got to this other idea, and I'm like, actually, I think this is the thing. And then you start on another one, you restart the whole process. Like I said, first world problems. But I'm writing about, and like Sean Siegel, and this is not a new concept, but it does relate a lot to some of this uncertainty. just in like using an exploitative draft strategy in best ball as opposed to I don't know what else I would call it, reactive, however you want to call it, right? So that's why I mentioned on chip chasing that we never actually got to, because all we did was talk about DJ Moore and Sam Howell was that I think
that was me and that was
I know
we were to blame for that, me and you.
It's my fault. It's totally it's 100% my fault. But yeah, we're all trying to figure out who did this DJ Moore thing. But this like idea of just let the draft fall to you, right? Take the guys, that make sense in this room. And like to a certain extent, that is still true. But that could mean like you could get overweight on a situation that has a lot of uncertainty and the market has, right? Garrett Wilson in 4 straight drafts fell 3 picks past ADP. So the draft just said, it fell to me. I'm just going to take Garrett Wilson. And in a vacuum in any one draft, I don't even necessarily think that's wrong. I like Garrett Wilson too. Clearly we're both just doing the same Broncos thing over again. But like being exploitative around uncertain situations in the market can lead you to do different things in your drafts. And so like if you had said, I'm just going to let stuff fall to me in the draft, Broncos seem fine where they're going or whatever, and you just kind of let the draft flow to you and ended up with plenty of Broncos, you didn't exploit a situation that was very uncertain, but the market, like you said, was not pricing it as uncertain. They were pricing it as, we firmly believe a high, not the ceiling, that this whole price that they're ceiling phrase that we use is silly. They weren't priced at their ceiling, but they're priced at a very high end outcome. It has to go well for them where they're going. And so like you have to balance these things, right? You have to balance, again, that's what we talked about last week. Like you got to balance ADP value and right structure and letting the room fall to you. But you also have to balance this macro idea that says, I don't know, man, the market's really believing in the Broncos. Like what happens if the market is wrong, right? You could have done this with Trey Lance for 2 years, particularly his rookie season.
Like even got a little bonus period in February.
Yeah, there's been tons of the only person that you could have just absolutely flat faded and in like all of best ball and just crushed is Trey Lance. The market has continued to decide until this year, finally. So now he'll do something. The market has decided.
Now I actually think he might be worth taking.
Yeah, exactly. But I did this with Trey Lance, right? I was like, I know better. 2 years ago, I said, this is the kind of guy we want to draft in fantasy. Look at the 49ers. This is the dream. This is the dream, dude. 3rd overall pick, that archetype, that rushing upside in this offense. They didn't even have CMC then. Now they have CMC. It's like, this is the dream. But the market agreed that like, I'm willing to pay whatever for this guy because look at what he could do. If you took the opposite side of that, even though your belief was Lance is the kind of guy I want to draft, that you were absolutely exploiting this market's total inefficiency on Trey Lance. And so you can
you also get another situation. Again, I am drafting Anthony Richardson. I like Anthony Richardson. Even at his elevated price, I think he's still a pretty good pick. Partly because I think he's going to move up. I think he's going to end up being like kind of a late 6th rounder by the end of this. But you get that same bet. Rookie quarterback, pretty raw passer. We're buying in a lot to the coach here. The coach is so good. He'll don't worry about those red flags. He can't seem to hit a guy 5 yards away from him. That's fine. So it's again, this is maybe like I don't know. The fact that I'm like continuing to bet on all the closest comparables that we can find for these failed situations is maybe not making me feel that great. But I mean, that is, if you wanted to bet against Anthony Richardson, I think you're getting a similar bet to the Lance bet, which is paid off spectacularly. Richardson isn't quite as expensive as Lance got to, right?
Correct. Right.
Or as a
rookie,
quarterback
is more expensive. So that is.
I know Lance was like what 7th round last year, but what was he as a rookie? I don't remember.
Similar. He got to the same thing as a rookie.
Okay.
The one difference, I guess, is it was a very different time in best ball. Like we only had best ball mania back then, basically all summer. And so Lance did start very low actually back then. Like Lance was a good pick in my opinion when like drafts opened and stuff. Like you were getting him in like the 13th round or something at like the very beginning of BBM that summer. The problem was he became the Skyy Moore of quarterbacks. He became whatever the trendiest guy, the Marquez Callaway, the Marquez Callaway of quarterbacks that shoots up 10 rounds or whatever. And then it got out of hand. And my problem was I kept buying all the way up to not necessarily maybe at the exact top, because my bags were packed so heavily already by then, but like I didn't stop, in the 8th round or whatever. Richardson has that at least a little bit, that he was going lower, but like we never really got that big of a discount on him because everybody's been, we're crazy. We know
in the
about
big board
stuff.
and other tournaments, but you're not in the same tournament that you're in now.
Correct.
You're not
exactly
dealing with teams that have super cheap Richardson. Not really.
Do you think, I'm just looking at the ADP just while I'm thinking about it. Speaking of uncertainty around like ADP, I mean, ADP shifting and stuff like that can be very uncertain, and being able to predict that, right? If you predicted the Lance rise, you would just say, well, he's in the 12th round right now. I think he's going to get crazy steamed. I'm just going to take some now and not worry about it later. Do you think, so I'm just looking, Deshaun Watson goes, as the QB 9, Richardson is the QB 10. They're pretty close to each other within less than 6 picks. But then after that, you got to get all the way up to Lawrence as the QB 8, and he goes at 62. So there's a huge gap there. So is your thought process that Richardson probably jumps Watson and then kind of fills this void in the draft where we have 2 rounds of no quarterbacks basically, or how are you kind of thinking about that?
I think Lawrence comes down some. The Lawrence bet to me is not, it's not an uncertain situation. It's a pretty stable situation, but we are banking on him to take another step forward for that ADP to make any sense. And I guess there is some uncertainty with how Calvin Ridley fits in this offense after a couple years off. We're like, oh, he's going to fit in great. He's going to fit in good. We're, 3-4 turn, late third, really, ADP. And not worried about it. He's going to definitely be ahead of Christian Kirk. We don't have to see a single snap from anything to feel very comfortable making that bet. He's going to be a huge boost to Trevor Lawrence, obviously. So we can go ahead and take Trevor Lawrence, basically a pocket passer, way ahead of these other
200 yards or something like that.
Yeah, he's mobile, but he's not a dual threat by any means.
No.
And so we are we need a very efficient passing season from Trevor Lawrence. So that's not like really the reason that quarterback ADP is so efficient is that we have identified the few guys in the league who are just like absolute superstars, like Mahomes and Josh Allen. And then we have fully understood now how important rushing is at the quarterback position. But Lawrence doesn't really fit that. So I think, he could. We're making the bet that he basically becomes like another superstar passer, which is in the range of outcomes for sure. But it does strike me that we're like maybe a little out of our skis on Lawrence. I think he falls a little bit. I think Richardson and Watson probably start to move up a bit. Because I wonder if Watson, I think we're probably going to hear stuff about them throwing more and playing more 3 wide receiver sets and kind of building offense around him. I think we probably hear that drumbeat continue. Oh, this is going to be new look Browns this year. Oh, we're seeing way more 3 wide receiver sets in training camp, all that stuff. Because they have to they have like a lot of egg on their face with this Watson thing right now. They have to dig out of that or everybody's getting fired there. So I think they build that offense around him a bit more this year.
And
if we start to hear
anywhere,
stuff,
but the coaching staff will all be gone if he fails.
And the front office. They'll clear house, I think, like for real. So yeah, I would. That's not necessarily a reason to be like super in on Watson, but I think we're going to hear stuff about them like being a bit more of an open offense. We already have a little bit, and I think that type of stuff continues. So my guess is that this big gap that we're seeing now kind of tightens in both directions as Lawrence moves down a little bit and Watson and Richardson moves up. I don't know that anyone will jump anybody necessarily, but I think they'll all be kind of closer.
And I do think that also makes sense because we just generally don't get huge like multi-round gaps of not having quarterbacks. I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or whatever, but you just generally don't get one guy going at 60 and then the next quarterback going in the mid 80s, just because like they're stacking elements. There's people love to fill out their starting lineup elements. And also this year in particular, we've outlined this a ton. Once you get past, Mark Andrews, Lamar, you do get to Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, and like all the way down to Tyler Lockett or something like that, where it's like, I don't know, man, there's 30 picks here and these guys all look the same to me. And so it kind of, quarterbacks can be the way that people get out of
sort
that.
of tier break thing. Like a tier's broken, I'm going quarterback here.
Right. Exactly. I kind of think that's why Herbert will continue to live where he always lives, is because he's plopped right in the middle of that wide receiver at that draft dead zone. It's not even just,
it's real easy to take Herbert. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can get him with Keenan or Mike Williams if you want to. But what I was just going to say is, look, there are going to be an infinite amount of these situations, and you can't possibly nail the best player take person, the best football, like hand in the dirt football analyst that plays best ball or fantasy football is going to whiff on so many of these situations that your whole goal can't be, I know better about every single one of them. You may know better about certain ones of them, but the easiest way to win at best ball at this game is more so of a market manipulation tactic, right? If you just said, these people are crazy with this Broncos stuff, what if it fails? You just wiped them all out of your player pool. That was a big edge.
Or just take an underweight stance, like don't make it a huge part of your. I think the other thing with the Broncos too, and I don't know that we have this type of thing this year. Let me know if something comes to mind, but the Broncos played the Chiefs in week 17.
Oh yeah.
So you also had the I gotta get this game. So
Definitely.
you're pushed. So it's like this uncertain situation. Like, not only is it going to work out, but it's like, when it does work out, it's going to win me all the money because they play the Chiefs in week 17. And then naturally, even if you don't really believe in the Broncos, but you believe in the Chiefs, which was pretty good bet, you're bringing back a Bronco, in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that we have that type of situation, because the premier game this year is the Bengals and the Chiefs, and that doesn't really have any true uncertainty to it. I mean, the Chiefs wide receiver situation or whatever, but
we should talk about the Chiefs. We should talk about the Chiefs wide receiver situation, because that one is also one of the most uncertain situations in all of football. But two things the market has done that I find interesting. A, of course, Travis Kelce is there, so we can't compare it to the Panthers wide receiver uncertainty where they just don't have anybody. We're trying to figure out how the pecking order works out. Obviously, Travis Kelce is the man here, and we kind of do understand what the backfield looks like between Pacheco, McKinnon, and then CEH as kind of the 2B or something like that, right? I've grown to draft a smidge of CEH, which we'll get to in this kind of Bengals Chiefs conversation. If something happens, I don't get any Chiefs, maybe I have a 0 running back team. He is the third running back, and I think people view him that way, and probably should. But I like the guys where he's the third, but if something happens to McKinnon, that's good for him.
He can do
either.
And
also, and if something happens to Pacheco, that's good for him. He won't do anything when both of them are healthy, but if either one of them go down, he has a path. So we'll toss CH into this whole kind of crazy Chiefs discussion. But the market has decided, and I agree with the premise, this is the same thing. I'm buying this guy too. Literally every player that we're talking about is the theme of uncertainty. Are players I'm buying, but Kadarius Toney, right? He's
so I'm actually not really buying Toney. So this one's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So this one will be interesting. He's definitely the most talented and the best bet out of all the Chiefs wide receivers to be the guy that pops. But the market has decided him going in the 70s. And the next Chiefs wide receiver is, I think, still Skyy Moore, going in the mid to late 120s. Rashee Rice goes in a similar spot, and then you get MVS in the 150s. Richie James undrafted. If there's anybody else, Justin Watson or whatever, undrafted. But the market has made a very clear pecking order in Toney, and then Skyy versus Rice. I think will work itself out. I think Rice might end up passing Skyy.
I think he probably flips him, but I think that'll be a little bit news based to some extent.
Definitely. And then MVS, and then nobody else. And I could sit here and make a case that we should bet on Richie James over Kadarius Toney. And one guy goes on. I mean, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but one guy goes undrafted and one guy goes in the 7th round. And yet I also have fallen into a trap myself personally that I can see this upside. I don't want to call it a trap, into this discussion point. Clearly, this guy, first round pick, has been efficient no matter when he's been on the field. And they're, second year, right? They traded for him in season. We can make every case in the book to say why Toney didn't pop last year, right? Wide receiver changing teams during the middle of the year, blah, 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 blah. Hurt all the time. Field. Oh, yeah. Never. So, like, he doesn't get to practice, nonetheless, get to play. So how could he ever get up to speed? Now he has the whole offseason, right? He's the most talented guy here, blah, 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 blah. Everyone understands that. But, like, there's not that much certainty. Like, there is nowhere near this amount of certainty as to who, like, it could be Skyy, second year breakout. It could be Rashee Rice. We could all be wrong about Rashee Rice, and Patrick Mahomes could be right. Like, that's possible. It could be, like I said, it could be Richie James at the very back end. It could be DeAndre Hopkins, right? We have no idea how this thing is going to break out, but we're very certain about Toney. And I do think I have been admittedly kind of trying to assess my Toney thing because I think I am being just a little lazy. Like, oh, yep, I think he's the best bet here, so I don't care about the price. And I'm trying to be a little smarter about that moving forward. Hence this show.
Yeah, I think Toney's like a straight up bad pick. I think he's a bad pick, but I think he's like the counter argument to that is that, yeah, but if he's a good pick, he's going to crush. If you're like,
if I'm wrong, not right. His price can't be right. He's one of these guys to me.
Yeah, if I'm wrong that he's a bad pick, then he could be an amazing pick. And that's why I'm like, you're not going to see me like running around Twitter telling everybody stop drafting Kadarius Toney, okay? Because I don't need those receipts hanging out there. I mean, it's the type of pick where, I mean, the upside is definitely there. I mean, it's there in a big way. Kadarius Toney is like a super talented athlete. But I mean, if you just want to look at like who had a better season last year and like we just like know they're going to get the same amount of routes, like I think I'd bet on Richie James. I think I'd bet on Richie James. Like, I mean, again, that's like kind of I'm trying to hit like a single or maybe a double as opposed to a home run. So I don't even saying that is tough because Richie James is just never going to have those high end outcomes that Kadarius Toney has. But and actually the framing I gave is probably poor because one of my big issues with Toney is that I am worried about how many routes he gets to run. Mm-hmm. And I'm worried about like this Chiefs team. They may have decided like, look, the rest of the league is convinced that you have to have these really high paid superstar wide receivers, and that's great because we were able to get a ton of draft capital back for Tyreek Hill and not have to pay him all the money and then win a Super Bowl without him. But like, what if we just like have a rotation of dudes who are good at various different things? And so the fact that, Toney, I think Toney's definitely going to have his little package of plays and do some cool Toney stuff. But I'm just pretty worried that he's more than, even as a hit, like a 65% route rate type of guy, maybe compare him to as a hit kind of Antonio Brown with the Buccaneers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That kind of guy. I mean, and look, he can pay off his current ADP, even if he only runs 65% of the routes with Patrick Mahomes, because he is that talented. Which makes me nervous about it. But he could genuinely have like a 40% route rate this year
or lower. Yeah, the range is crazy wide. They have enough bodies. They don't need him. Now they may need him to like truly access the ceiling, right? Like you said, they definitely. I would almost 100% guaranteed. Never want to do this, especially on a show about uncertainty. But like you said, assuming health, he has some form of a package of gadgety plays or whatever. Like that's the floor. The floor is he's just this little gadget back, kind of like we saw down the stretch last year, right? Even in the Super Bowl, he scores, but he didn't play. Basically, that is the floor. That's a really fucking low floor for a guy going 70th overall. Like
that's a high. I mean, so one thing to think about with like what you're paying for players is like what you need from various points in the draft. And if you have a pick, in the 70s and the guy basically doesn't do anything for most of the year, it's going to really hurt your chances of advancing. It really is. If that guy moves back to like the 11th round or the 12th round, all of a sudden it's a different bet. Like, yeah, you probably need him to do something, other than just contribute a spike week in the playoffs. But like, you could have him not play for 6 weeks, not like come on down the stretch and have like a few really good games. Like what you're asking from that pick is like materially different when you move from like the 7th to the 11th, I think. And Tony's price is like a core contributor price, a guy who you like need to be like a key part of your team week in, week out. And that's not what he profiles as. He profiles as like, yeah, I mean, certainly in his highest end outcomes, he could be that guy, but he just wasn't like involved last year. He ran 5 routes in the Super Bowl. He ran 3 routes in the conference championship game. I mean, like, we want to see, like, he had 8 routes. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh, dude, he could go out there and get 8 targets. It's like, well, he's had 8 routes in his last 2 games combined. Like, that seems actually pretty implausible to me that he would have 8 targets in a game. He's averaging half the routes needed for that. Even if
imagine the targets per route run, bros, if he did rack up 8 targets on 8 routes.
100% target per route run, dude. He's the best wide receiver in the league.
Where would he go? Yeah, where would he get drafted if he ran 8 routes and got 8 targets in the final 2 games?
I think he'd be the 101 based on his current price. I honestly do. I mean, but it's kind of crazy to me that he's being priced where he's at. It does strike me as a situation where the market is saying, I am not going to get burned by the upside here. You are not going to make me feel bad that I didn't have enough Kadarius Toney. I will have enough Kadarius Toney. And I guess like I'm not going to have enough Kadarius Toney. I know that. I'm not going to full fade him because of everything we've talked about with the upside. I mean, if he was out there running a full slate of routes, like I'm going to have a bad 2023 if Kadarius Toney runs a full slate of routes. So I will have some exposure. I may try to get like, I've talked to Liam Murphy's talked about this, like trying to prioritize some guys in like your high stakes teams. If you're like going to be underweight them, if you just have a tough time clicking them, like maybe prioritize the click in like, if you're going to play, if you have a couple teams that you're playing a little bit bigger with, maybe get that guy there. If he's a guy like Toney, where you're like, the really scares me.
Not really Brandon Cooks last year, right? Like I didn't have any. That's kind of the argument. I'm not even trying to like dunk on Brandon Cooks, but Brandon Cooks was like a volume play on a bad team that didn't have target competition.
Have conviction. Don't just like use your high stakes to spread out your shit. But I'm saying like if I might do that with Toney, where I'm like, well, let me basically hedge. Let me hedge a little bit because I have a hard time clicking Toney, and often I don't even like have the chance to click him because I'm like, what happened to Toney? He's not even here. Like people are like reaching for this dude ahead of an ADP that I think is a little preposterous. So yeah, there's my Toney spiel.
You also do get a little bit of the week 17 issues with him that it's just never gonna fall because there's no other chief that goes anywhere near him. I guess Pacheco kind of does, but people don't really love Isaiah Pacheco. Not certain. You can't dream about Pacheco upside like you can dream about Toney's upside. And then you got all the Bengals that go in front of him. You got Kelsey and Mahomes that go in front of him. So I just don't see. And he is that kind of a guy that I don't think falls. And he's the perfect example of exact what you said is what kind of my plan to do moving forward is I've been just kind of taking him when it made sense on probably those chalky ass Bengals teams or whatever.
I take him with Mahomes. I definitely want him stacked for sure.
When I need to shoot the moon at wide receiver, right? So I recently, I mentioned to you, and I haven't really told anybody yet, but I maxed the Poodle 2 and I drafted all hyper fragile teams. And so I do push my limits a little bit more on right? I'm not taking RB to start the draft. My preferred hyper fragile, which I learned in this experiment, was kind of 2 of the early guys. Before I include Bryce in that, not really ETN, but from Bryce, all the way up to CMC. If I can get 2 of those guys, and then 2 in this like 10th round to 12th round pocket, which is very highly variant, but my favorite guys there are like Damian Harris, Rashad Penny, Antonio Gibson, or whatever. Kind of get 2 of those guys and then 2 of the studs is something that has really worked well for me personally in hyper fragile. But you run into, like you said, 2 issues. One, you run into I need wide receiver upside because, I mean, God forbid you detour at quarterback or tight end or something too. Your wide receivers are horrible when you do that. You got Mike Evans, wide receiver 2 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So you do need home run swings on some of those teams. And he is more of a home run swing than some of the other guys that go around him.
And he's a legit home run swing. Like he could, I mean, he's scary. Like he could be, kind of Tyreek Hill-ish, he's not as fast as Hill, but like the dude can make people miss. He's like really dangerous in the open field. He gets open quickly. He's like Deontay Johnson, but like fun after the catch,
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's a pretty good comp. And he happens to go pretty close to Deontay Johnson. And that's kind of the difference. I don't dislike Deontay Johnson, but Deontay Johnson is not ever going to go, in the beginning of the second round or the 1-2 turn or something like that. Like that's a very unlikely thing, of course, for anyone. But like Kadarius Toney emerging, running 80% of the routes and being the man behind the man in the wide receiver group, the man behind Travis Kelce in this offense is like a second round pick. Look what we just did to Garrett Wilson. Look what we've done to Chris Olave and those guys.
Who's to say he's behind Travis Kelce entering 2024?
Yeah.
You're certain he's behind 35-year-old Travis Kelce after that breakout season that just buried Pat Kareem?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We have to cancel this show. All we're doing is telling everybody to stop drafting Kadarius Toney, and then in the same breath, we're like, well, he could be a first-round pick next year.
After Kadarius Toney just buried your former co-host of Legendary Sickos.
Yeah, you get the 404 error when you go to the special that we're running. Yeah, but this is to me is like the hardest part of like, and why the uncertainty conversation is so important is because we can both understand that the floor on this guy is absurdly low and the uncertainty is through the roof. He said he could just run 5 routes most weeks for like, that's possible. The other end is that he basically is a mini me version of Tyreek Hill, and you're getting a first round ish, a guy who we're considering at the, in the first, second round heading into next year, particularly like you mentioned with the Travis Kelce issues, and you're getting him in the 70s right now, which is kind of what happened with Stephon Diggs. If you remember with the Bills, we got Stephon Diggs in this range. Now he's been an annual first round pick ever since. I'm not trying to compare the situations or the players or anything, but I'm just saying that's what can happen. And so how do you weigh, like for people listening, like it's up to each person. Pat's like, I'm going to make sure I just don't get totally boxed out of Toney, but I don't want to take some big stand. But like, that's up to you to figure out, like, this guy is a home run swing, but like, if you watch baseball, like he's Joey Gallo. Like it's a home run or you're striking out, buddy. Like there's not a lot of in between, and you have to figure out how you want to handle all those situations, because it also can't just be, oh my God, there's so much risk and there's so much uncertainty. So that can't be the only thing. The upside case does matter, but the price is really important, and you have to factor all these things in, and it's very tough.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing for me with Toney, and the reason why I'm just like, I am trying to be price conscious with this stuff, is like, it is easy to get, I think, swept up in some of the upside cases. The upside, it's easy to dream on upside, and it's fun to dream on upside. And that's like kind of like half the reason we're playing fantasy football, is to be like, not just enticed by the upside, which is like fun in its own right, to just, kind of dream about, oh, I drafted this guy, it's going to be the next Tyreek Hill, it's going to be so good, it's going to be a first round pick next year. But then like that stuff does sometimes happen, and it's like the best feeling in the whole world, you actually predict it. But for me, like with Toney, and the reason I'm trying to like stay price conscious, as like the mob just overruns me and I'm trampled by all the Kadarius Toney looters. I'm like looking at his college production profile. I mean, the guy basically didn't play for his first 3 years at Florida. And then he did not have a particularly impressive senior season in terms of his market share numbers. He had a 23% dominator rating, which is like fine, but not a breakout season. And he was a 4th-year player. Then he was drafted in the first round, which surprised me famously. And then he came into the league and immediately drew a lot of targets. He had 53 targets on 196 routes, which is awesome. What is that? That is a 27% target per route run. That's great. He did it on a very shallow ADOT, 6.5 ADOT. So, that's a little less impressive. He's, very much of an underneath target kind of guy. But hey, get those routes up, and now we're talking. But then his team immediately gives up on him. New coaching staff comes in and says, don't want this guy. And they trade him for a 3rd-round pick to a new team. He only runs a total of 103 routes all of last year. His ADOT drops to 3.5. So he's even more of kind of an underneath guy. And at that point, low routes and super low ADOT screams sub-package type of dude,
Which is what he was. He runs a lot of they do tons of the jet motion, stop motion, all that kind of stuff. Like they would do it with Tyreek and McCole. They get these freaks who are, Tyreek is obviously one of the best wide receivers, but like McCole never figured out how to play wide receiver. Toney may not ever figure out how to play wide receiver. But when you're that fast and that, like, he's known as the human joystick. Like that's his nickname, Toney, because he can just stop and start. And so it's the perfect gadget skill set, but like we need more than that.
Yeah, we need a lot more than that at this price. And that's my concern. And we've seen like Mecole Hardman has always been kind of, very efficient on his targets and, but it's never scaled. And we also know Andy Reid's like the master of designing up various plays and stuff. So that's just where when I look at the whole picture on Kadarius Toney, I'm like, the concern coming in was that he was going to be a gadget player who didn't run a lot of routes. That's the concern coming in.
Perception was of him, and that's kind of what he was in college. Even it was kind of a gadgety player,
And now he lands with like the gadget genius, the guy who's gonna like be happiest to have a gadget player, and it's been a gadget player like his entire career. He's only played 2 years, so I'm just like this red flag is like really red. This is about as red as it gets, and it's pretty big, so I think the market is overlooking it. Like they're really overlooking the red flag. So again, I will hedge this fade take, but that's why I'm willing to make it, right? Because I don't want to these uncertain situations. With the DJ Moore one, I'm willing to overlook some red flags. There's certain cases where I think overlooking red flags is the way we want to go. But it is price dependent. And I think it also should be based on kind of your evaluation of the overall situation, how low the floor is, how likely the ceiling outcomes are. And then is the price changes trying to like reevaluate? Because look, if Toney dropped to the 9th round, that would still honestly feel like a little like, oh man, I'm taking on some risk with this guy. But at that point, I'd be like, okay, 1, he was way more expensive earlier, so I'm getting this cheaper Toney. I like that. 2, the ceiling is massive. What am I really giving up at wide receiver? Like Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. Like
exactly.
If this dude hits, he's going to crush those guys. And I like Bateman, and Flowers is, I think, somewhat interesting. So, like, all of a sudden, that upside component would matter a lot more to me. And I'd say, if the floor hits here, it doesn't hurt me as much because the price dropped. But I think in this range, in these kind of like late single digit, early double digit range, that's an area of the draft where we do tend to see guys like move pretty big based on hype. It's a Skyy Moore thing, right? Skyy Moore comes up from like the 12th all the way to the 8th. That doesn't even feel like that big of a range because you're kind of like, there's no one I love here, whatever. But like it is. That is a very big range. That might be like a doubling of value if you think about things from an auction perspective, right?
Right.
Like that would be, potentially someone who's going for like $6 going to $12.
I was going to say $5 to $10. Yeah, you go from $5 to $10 or whatever. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's you're paying twice as much. It doesn't feel like it, but you're paying twice as much for the same guy. So, and in any given draft turn, right? If Toney were to fall to me, that's why I think falling ADP value is so important because you're like, hey, especially in that range of the draft, like you might be paying like $8 for a $12 player if a guy falls far enough.
Yep.
So anyway, being price conscious, I think particularly in this range with uncertain guys is important.
Just one thing to extend the Toney and the Chiefs talk, just to conceptually how you can use this not just with the Chiefs, but in any other situation as well. I am kind of moving forward going to be drafting a bunch of these other guys And as crazy as it sounds, Richie James has been kind of the guy who
talk to me about Richie James, because like his numbers last year were good,
quite good.
Yeah, I have like a model that looks at these some of the efficiency numbers and stuff, and like I have to tell it to chill out on Richie James because it wants to be like Richie James is a smash, and I'm like, no, he's not, because we don't know he's going to actually play. So chill out.
I know. So what I will say is they're very hard, and then more uncertainty issues. We just built out some projections like team level, but so what we, instead of doing like for a full season, we're projecting it like here's what your weekly projection is. Like net neutral matchup, assuming everybody's healthy, right? So like we put Jameson Williams in, we have Javonte Williams in, we have Breece Hall in. We're just assuming everyone's healthy. And so with the Chiefs, that's very difficult because, like you said, we got to give Toney a certain level of routes. We got to give, right, Richie James some or zero routes. What do you do with MVS? What do you do with Rice versus Skyy, et cetera? So it's very difficult. But you can also start to play around with those things. And then I like to play around with them in like visually, conceptually, how do they fit together? And so like I'm envisioning this. If Toney is not, I think Richie James became this idea of this. He is my bet against Toney. So if I'm not taking Toney in the 7th round or whatever, or 6th round, Richie James is kind of this beneficiary because, like, if we think about why. So MVS is MVS. In my opinion, MVS is the one that has the stable role. Exactly how many routes and stuff is a little bit of a different story, but he's the blocker of the crew. He's the downfield threat of the crew. He's the old reliable guy. You mentioned Toney never running any routes in the playoffs. In the conference championship, all the other guys got hurt. And like everybody was hurt. MVS never left the field, and MVS had his best game of the season. He actually bailed them out in the playoffs. He's just the reliable guy. We don't have to like him or whatever, but I feel fairly confident from a main projection he's there. So you put him on the outside, and then I'm starting to lean more to Rice as like almost the best bet as the other main outside wide receiver in 3 wide receiver sets. Skyy can change that. Of course, Toney can change that. But I think even though Toney is that low ADOT guy, he's actually been a lot more historically on the outside. And the low ADOT is
he's not a slot player necessarily.
Yes. And Skyy,
he's more like Zay Jones or something that way.
Correct.
Right? Like
I think it's easy to say, oh, look at his low ADOT. He fits in the slot. And it's like, he's not Rondale Moore. I know that they're like both gadgety type players, but Rondale is a slot receiver. He can only play slot, whatever.
Richie James, with the Chiefs, he played 60% of his snaps out wide last year, 36% in the slot.
And so I think Richie James, right, if we're making this bet that Toney can't take that leap, theoretically it could be Skyy, but Richie James feels like the slot version of MVS for them to me. Is like you said, super efficient last year, produced in a situation where they needed some wide receivers to be reliable over the middle of the field. And like, he's never going to play, full snaps and full on, on the outside, but the Chiefs, it's fine. It's the Chiefs. They're going to play tons of multi wide receiver sets. And like, if Toney doesn't do it, Richie James feels like that best bet to me. Of course, like I said, I'm discounting Skyy a little bit in this, so he's where you could kind of go wrong. But Rashee Rice is an outside wide receiver, right? Justin Watson, Justin Ross, all these other guys are outside players. So if Toney is not the slot, which we're talking about, Toney is really not even a slot wide receiver. You have Richie James and Skyy Moore competing kind of for the slot snaps. And like, as bad as Skyy was last year, I'm not counting him out, but it's almost like we're putting Skyy in the 120s and we're putting Richie James. Richie James doesn't even get drafted in most drafts. I feel like that gap is a little bit too wide when you start to break down when you start like these, we have to put these guys into roles on the offense. It's not just like a spreadsheet, right? Sending out who's playing the slot. And it's like, you get there and you're like, shit, it's probably got to be Skyy or Richie James. And so now if I'm betting against Toney and I'm betting Skyy wasn't very good on this veteran who was good last year, the stars are kind of aligning for him to me. So I've been using that as kind of like, okay, this is a way for me to get away from Toney, but I can still win on this situation. Maybe not the same, Richie James is not going to be a 2nd round pick, but like if he's as good as he was last year on the Giants and now he's on the Chiefs, he can be a pretty damn big hit in the 18th round of drafts.
Yeah, he can. And I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that's tough about the uncertain situation stuff too is that like when you're swimming against the current on it, I think it can you really feel the uncertainty in a way that makes you not want to go in.
Yep.
But when you're with the herd, it's like we've all convinced ourselves that, the Broncos last year wasn't an uncertain situation. We don't need to worry about that. This is certain. We know we can do this. We're all together. We're not idiots. And, you feel good. And I think with like Justin Watson was drafted. I just checked. He was drafted 891 times last year. That's not very many times.
No.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's the numbers I have from actually, that's probably too low. I think that's a bad stat that I just gave, but he was not drafted a lot. And so, but he advanced at a high rate, not just overall, but to the finals, because he was tied to Patrick Mahomes all the time. He didn't really do a ton, but like if you have Mahomes and you tackle on that 18th round guy who's like going to at least be correlated and has some chance of being in the mix, like what you need out of that pick, it could be nothing and you still are fine. And if you get something, now we're talking. And I think like if you're scared of that uncertainty, which I think I kind of am sometimes, I'm like, but is he even going to play? I'd just rather take Toney. It's so much more exciting,
I know.
Or I'd rather take Skyy Moore, who I can see it. I can see the, but Moore costs a lot more, like Moore's going to be a guy who hurts your advance rates if you do not. Now he's not so expensive that he's really going to hurt if he doesn't do much, but you need something. You need something from Skyy Moore where he's going, or it's going to hurt a bit. Richie James, I haven't really been taking Richie James, but I think I'm going to start because it's like one of those situations where like, he was good enough last year. He got some guaranteed about $500,000 guaranteed money on a like $2 million contract. $1.2 million contract with $552,000 guaranteed. So he probably makes the final roster, and he's good last year, and he feels a need for them. So like so that's the thing of like, again, with this price stuff, it's like if he happens to have one spike week for you and it's well timed, we're all going to talk about him as like the guy you had to have. That's how little we need out of those types of picks.
Here's one more final thing on the Richie James hype machine. If you recall, they tried to make Skyy Moore a return man last year, and it failed spectacularly. He fumbled multiple punts, if I remember correctly. They're just trying to get the ball in his hands and get the kid some action. Richie James has been a return man in his career, and a decent one. So I think that could also get him onto the, even if he's not right, even if he's not earning that slot role, maybe Skyy does or whatever. I feel everything that you just start to look through, you're like, well, is he going to make the team? Like that's the scary thing about an uncertain kind of veteran at the back end of the Chiefs wide receiver room. But I think there's, the return stuff, what he did last year, the fact that they don't really have any slot receivers, blah, blah, blah. They got all these guys to play on the outside, and they got all these tight ends too. They just don't really have his skill set. And so I'm also going to be hammering him quite a bit here, I think, over the next little bit. But let's hit a couple more before we get out of here. A couple more kind of
By the way, I think the stat that I may have gave on Justin Watson might have been the playoff rosters, not the total drafted.
I just pulled up. I'm seeing 891 as well. I just don't know if that is it just says drafted count. And so I don't know if
but Jefferson's is at 37,600. And obviously there was so what's
that should be right? There were 400 and something thousand teams. Is that correct?
It was 451,200 teams.
And so he should be 8%. Whatever that should be 8% of the.
Well, he should be drafted in every one of them.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
right.
Those are the teams,
no,
right? So the draft,
teams
so that's divided by 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
God.
So 891 is the correct.
Okay, so that's right. He was drafted 891 times. So it's a correct stat. Wow.
And somebody made the finals with him. He made it. He made one finals team, I think. No, he made four. He was on four
finals
teams. That's what tells you. You just hit on. He did nothing, but he's correlated to the right guys. Now imagine that.
And he does something. Now imagine that, and it's good. Yeah.
Only 891 Justin Watson teams, and 4 of them made the Best Ball Mania finals.
But I also wonder. I wonder, like, the Justin Watson teams, and I could probably literally go look them up and see. But my guess is they probably are less likely to have had Skyy Moore, because you felt who's taking Justin Watson, a guy who got boxed out of earlier stacks. So, in some ways, just having a Mahomes, Kelsey, and not the other guys, and then you're like, I need someone else. I'll take Watson. Ended up being kind of optimal last year, and that was So you played it. You got the expensive guy we were actually certain about. If he doesn't fall off with age, he's going to be a smash. He was a smash. And then you went and got the most uncertain situation for the cheapest cost. I think that could be the way to play it again this year. At least, look, it's one way to play it. It's a thing I want to mix in, I think.
Yep, I totally agree. I did want to. We mentioned Deshaun Watson. I just wanted to hit the Browns super quickly, because I wouldn't go so far as to say the market is completely all in, quite like we were with the Broncos, but it's not that far off. Deshaun Watson is going in the 80s as the QB9 overall. I don't think that Nick Chubb necessarily, his cost really has anything to do with any Deshaun Watson hype. I think it has more to do with the fact that he's Nick Chubb, maybe the best runner in football, and Kareem Hunt is not there anymore. But Amari Cooper is very expensive, and David Njoku is very expensive. And even Elijah Moore, despite the fact that he has done nothing in a year and a half or whatever, and I assume is going to be just a full-time slot receiver, given the fact that they drafted Cedric Tillman and have DPJ. The Browns are a somewhat close to this idea of the Broncos, and Deshaun Watson was horrid last year. I think we all expect that that's not the real Deshaun Watson that we'll see this year, but we also don't know that. Right. So what are your just general thoughts kind of on the Browns in terms of uncertainty, how you feel about that situation, and then the prices?
The prices are uncomfortable. And I think in some ways they're moved up a little bit by the Jets prices. I mean, it's easy to take Amari Cooper in the 3rd round. And certainly if he falls to the 4th, then, you're like, well, I already have Garrett Wilson here, easy little combo. Maybe even have Garrett Wilson and Bryce in the 3rd, and then Amari comes back around the corner, and you're like running to the podium with Amari Cooper in the early 4th. And I don't know that if you had asked me before the schedule came out if I'd ever run to the podium with Amari Cooper in the early 4th round, I think I'd be like, I might take him. I don't think I'll be excited about it, you know. So especially if you told me they play the Jets outside,
what might be one of the best defenses in the NFL outdoors on New Year's Eve. Oh yeah, baby, wheels up. That seems like an Amari tournament winning game.
Yeah, but I think the thing with Amari is that I do feel pretty confident that he will be, the number 1 wide receiver in kind of the classic sense of, he's out there running the most routes. He's getting sort of the most first reads. Maybe ultimately we would prefer to have one of the other guys. If we do prefer, it's probably Elijah Moore, I'd imagine. But Moore is, talk about an uncertain situation. Team, I would say even more so than Toney, the team just appeared to give up on Elijah Moore, even though they got more in compensation, right? I guess, didn't they? Or with the pick swap thing, it's hard to say. I guess they got less. Maybe they got less with the swap. Anyway, they gave up on him. And we've seen this type of stuff not work out very well for the player. If a team gives up on you after drafting in the 2nd round, it's generally a horrible sign. And we saw this with Anthony Miller. That'd be another guy, I believe a 2nd round pick as well.
Yep.
And it's just dudes are just sometimes these guys just continue to wash out. Once that process starts, it doesn't always go very well from there. Corey Coleman was someone that very quickly was he's not part of our plans. I just think it's a really big red flag when a team's like, this dude is not part of our plans. As a young player, we're not sure how good he is yet. That is information, I think. So I've not been taking Elijah Moore very much. Also because I think he is a slot receiver, right? You have the Toney. How many routes does this guy run? And then it's like, and he's probably running them from the slot. And so I think he probably is really more capped than Toney in terms of like his overall upside. Plus there's a legit outside wide receiver one there. And I mean, the tight end is obviously much, much worse, but Njoku will get his targets, I think.
Yeah.
And Donovan Peoples-Jones is like an effective kind of field stretcher. He'll be out there a fair amount. And they just drafted another rookie who's, pretty interesting. He's a big bodied guy. I mean, I could see, would it shock you if like week 15, Cedric Tillman's like playing big X, Donovan Peoples-Jones is on the other side, on the outside, is like a field stretching Z, and Amari Cooper's in the slot?
Not at all.
That might be kind of fun. I mean, but it sucks for Elijah Moore. So he's the guy that I'm like a little nervous about. I like going the super cheap route and taking Cedric Tillman. He's available in the 18th round. He's a really fun. He's a 3rd round pick, and so the floor I think is pretty low with him. 5th year senior type of dude. He could totally suck. But I like the price, and I like, big guy from catching passes from Deshaun Watson could catch a touchdown for me. Njoku's okay, but I think Watson might be a bit underpriced, even though all of his receivers, I'm kind of like, But I think a mobile quarterback, yeah, he's coming off a bad year, but he's young. We've seen the ceiling. We know how high the ceiling can be. I think they're going to be motivated to pass a little bit more. I think I like Chubb where he's priced, so you could just bet on the offense and go like Chubb, Watson, tackle on DPJ and Cedric Tillman or something. I think that would be totally viable. Or you could go Chubb, Watson, and Njoku and tackle on one of those 2 wide receivers. I think Watson, I don't think I have a ton of him, but he's definitely someone that like would worry me if I went into the season. I'm like, ooh, I have 6% Watson. That could hurt.
Yep. I think that makes total sense. I will throw out 2 other quick things. Shout out to me, Jerome Ford, getting steamed all the way up. We've been praying on the Jerome Ford. Please God, don't bring Hunt back or don't sign Zeke or whatever around these parts for a while. I like to do, particularly obviously in the big board, but even early in draft season. I'm not a risk averse person. I'm very open to risk, and I like to take the shots on the backups in the high value backfields. And then you're gonna whiff plenty, but sometimes
we've heard good things about Ford too. Ford is one. I'm like maybe a little bit more risk averse, although I've kind of been looking at some stuff and I'm kind of rethinking maybe I should be taking more home run swings in the late rounds. But my favorite guys are, this guy has a job. This guy has a job, and also he might be good, and the offense might be good or run a lot. And in Browns, you get both. They might be good, and I could be totally wrong about this. They pass more thing. I mean, Stefanski likes to run, so you get kind of everything with Ford. They could bring back. I don't think they're bringing back Hunt though, and they've talked a big game. Matthew Berry in his combine rumors piece was talking that they like Jerome Ford a lot, and we're going to just have him as the number 2 guy. I mean, we've known that since the combine, or at least there were rumors that was the case since the combine, and everything since then has only reinforced that. So I think he continues to steam up because he's like one of those guys where we're going to feel like the clear handcuff. So
I agree.
You're getting ceiling and floor maybe.
Yeah,
and floor in terms of this guy has a role.
Right. Floor in terms, like he may not touch the ball is the floor, but
he averages 4 points a game, and or 3.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But he is a good example of of being able to dive into the uncertain, right? Because quotes and stuff, are just that, right? Every day, Kyle Shanahan says a different thing about one of his quarterbacks. Like, the quotes are just coaches out there filling their media responsibilities. But Kyle Shanahan doesn't even know if we're going to be alive, tomorrow. the difference is that when the payoff is really big and there's all that uncertainty, not every situation is worth diving into. For instance, I don't really know who James Conner's backup is. My guess is I would like to bet the most on Keontae Ingram, but it really wasn't Keontae Ingram last year. I don't really know, but I'm also like, Keontae hasn't made my list, right, over Jerome Ford or over some of these other guys that go back there. And that's racking and stacking. Uncertainty plays into this, and I'm willing to dive into the uncertain situations, but I have to figure out which ones I want to prioritize. So it's never easy and straightforward, but Jerome Ford was kind of one of those winners of an uncertain situation so far. And I was just going to say, you know who I was thinking about when you were talking about Elijah Moore and like the team giving up on him? But like, he looked really good as a rookie. We were excited about him as a prospect, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel this way about him as much as a prospect. He reminded me of Dante Pettis. Remember Dante Pettis as a rookie for the Niners pops up and you're like, oh my God, this is the wide receiver one, you know? They didn't have anybody back then. I can't even remember who was playing wide receiver for the 49ers back then, right? There was no Debo, no Ayuk. No, this is the team that they ended up bringing Emmanuel Sanders in
Marquise Goodwin, maybe?
This is Marquise Goodwin popped up, right? These guys were relevant. That tells you how bad the wide receiver room was. They had Trent Taylor back then. But so Dante Pettis pops up as a rookie, kind of not anything crazy, but kind of similar to Elijah Moore. Pops up, you're like, this dude can play, and there's no real competition for him in that wide receiver room. And then he was also a second round pick, and all of a sudden, gone. Like Kyle was just done with him.
Yeah, he was done with him.
He totally.
This is why there was some consternation about Brandon Ayuk when he was in the doghouse, because we just seen him.
This just happened.
End Pettis' career. I mean, Pettis was iced out and sent to New York. I mean, it was like quick. It was like Pettis wasn't doing whatever he was supposed to do, or maybe just wasn't very good, and they were just like, "You're done." And yeah, so it was a little nervous. It made me a little nervous when that was happening to you. But he blocked. He learned how to block.
Yes.
And
he figured out how to block, and he punched Fred Warner in the face or whatever during practice. And probably. And Fred Warner was like that. Athletes, just sick individuals. He was like excited about the fact that his teammate jacked him in the jaw. You know? He's like, I've been, man. It was actually a funny article where Fred Warner was talking about, I've been trying to push Ayuk, you know, to make him better or whatever. So he's just being a total prick at every practice to Ayuk. And it finally got Ayuk to just punch him right in the face. And that was like, he's like, see, I got him. He did what I wanted. I'm like, you wanted him to punch you in the face? That's a little excessive. But just one or two more quick things. I wanted to get your thoughts on the rookies.
Well, wait,
rookie quarterbacks. Go ahead.
I don't want to. Yeah, I do want to talk about rookie quarterbacks. But I just want to get your thoughts on a few more of these backfields while we're kind of on that subject.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Because I think that this is one of the key things. I talked to Davis Maddock on yesterday about this a little bit. But this is something I've been trying to figure out. And going after those high value offenses makes a ton of sense. But we have seen, the other thing work where it's like there's no one on this depth chart and it's a shitty offense, but James Robinson emerges, Myles Gaskin emerges, and it's just like you just consolidate snaps. So that there's kind of two ways to do it. You can either get a guy on a really good offense who emerges like Elijah Mitchell a few years ago. But it's not just the good offenses that can produce these league winners. So I just want to get a few more names out there on late round guys. Josh Kelly was someone that came up when I was talking to Davis because he fit kind of the Pirine type of mold where he was used last year. He was fine. No one else was really used. He basically profiles as probably the veteran backup, but we're not sure enough to take him.
Correct.
And I guess Spiller there would maybe be our Chris Evans, where it's like, well, they might use Spiller more this year, but it might just be that, it might just be that Kelly, has earned their trust. Of course, they could sign someone, which makes Kelly less interesting, but there's some of these situations. Like Deion Jackson was pretty good last year, got used a bit. Zach Moss, I think, is gone. Maybe it doesn't matter. He's
still there, and they drafted Evan Hall. I drafted Evan Hall once or twice, but I think I might do some Deion Jackson after we brought him up on Wednesday too, and I think I might do some Deion Jackson, but carry on.
Well, yeah, and it's just Gus Edwards was another dude who's like clear backup. There's really no one else. I mean, Justice Hill they re-signed, but I don't think you have to worry too much about him. They're not really going to bring anybody else in probably unless there's an injury. There's really not. It's hard to get that excited about Gus Edwards, but you could imagine him being, if things broke his way, kind of like the 1A back down the stretch. So there's and he's very cheap, and this offense could be pretty good. So there's certain situations where there's like a veteran who is like somewhat interesting, has shown a little bit, not shown enough that we're not excited, but shown enough to where he might have a job.
Yep.
Which is basically the Pirine thing.
Yep.
And so that's one
Pirine
way to go. Yeah, as long as the offense is good enough, a Samaje Perine's actually pretty cool. You could argue that Jerick McKinnon is basically kind of a Samaje Perine type of bet. Obviously much more of a receiving type guy, but we were making fun of his dead legs a couple of years ago. We're not that excited about him as a talent and at this point in his career, even though he once was very athletic. But then, you also have guys in some of these more on certain situations that are like Chicago, like could Roschon Johnson just take over that backfield? So anyway, thoughts on like who are you most excited about in these like uncertain backfields?
Yeah. So the reason, like I bring up, brought up Ford and have brought up, like you mentioned, Josh Kelly and stuff. Gus is another good one, but is because what we've seen, particularly this year, but kind of generally over the last couple of years, is there's definitely a lot to be said for targeting the uncertain situations, but we'll pull up because we don't know. The Bears are a great one. Nobody's like that excited about the Bears, like as a market. Like it's Fields and DJ Moore is one thing, but we get 3 Bears running backs that all go, from pick whatever. Herbert's like 120 now, 110, something like that, down to Foreman.
He's kind of the last of that tier that includes Garrett's and everything. Yeah. And
then down to Foreman, who I do think it's kind of funny that Foreman is just way after those other guys, but that's neither here nor there. Then we have 3 Bears guys that go before the second back from these other offenses. Like you said, right. Gus Edwards is the clear 2. Now, the reason why those other guys go is because we can tell ourselves the story that Donta Foreman is the one.
Yeah.
But what really generally happens is even the one on the Bears is still in a committee. This isn't Christian McCaffrey as the one, right? This is, he's the 1A, and like Roschon's still mixing it. A lot of times all 3 of them are going to play, right? And so I have been not avoiding those guys because I do still take some of those guys, more so actually Foreman, just because he's the cheapest and I don't really know that he's worse than those other guys. But I like to dive into Ford. I won't mention the name from the Giants backfield, but pick any one of the Giants backups behind Saquon. Saquon hasn't signed his franchise tag, by the way. There's a lot of, he's been hurt. He's getting a little older. There's a lot of potential issues, and we don't draft another Giants running back, right? We don't draft the Colts thing. Jonathan Taylor is a second-round pick, goes near the 1-2 turn. No other Colts running backs get drafted, right? And it's like, I like to dive into those because the cost is so cheap. And so it's not that I'm out on the Bears because I will draft those guys too, but like explain to me why one running back on all these good offenses gets drafted and 3, on like mediocre offenses get drafted. So that's just kind of how I view it. I play it kind of similarly to you mentioned with not the same thing as with Toney, but with these other backfields. Like the Bears, I'm really not taking much Herbert because I like the other guys around him on the other offenses at running back right there. But I'll use ADP value. I'll use certain drafts to make sure I don't have 0% Herbert, because if he is the guy, I do think he can be really good for fantasy at that cost. The Dolphins are another similar one. Like I probably am going to have the most Jeff Wilson because he's the cheapest and the most readily available for me. But I'll take Mostert. And A-Chain is similar, that I'm okay with it. I don't want to have 0. Like A-Chain is like,
I don't want to have
the
0.
Toney. A-Chain is like the Toney of running backs. Like, oh my God, if they give this guy a bunch of the work in this offense with his explosiveness, like I could be buried. And I draft a lot of 0 RB and hero RB teams. So like I should have that kind of guy in my portfolio, but he is a little pricey for me. But I don't want to have zero.
This was cool on Twitter or something. I think it was like they were comparing A-Chain's role to like potentially to Deebo Samuel's role, and I was like, oh no. Like I'm so
the guy who broke fantasy. Yeah. That's a scary thing if you don't have much of him, like I don't, for someone to say, yeah, remember what Deebo did? We're perennially gonna overdraft Deebo Samuel because of what he did that 1 year as a rusher.
Yeah, under this coach.
Yeah.
So one guy, so this is gross, but if we want to talk about like clear number 2, solid veteran, gonna be able to hold off other dudes behind him, going to be trustworthy, has a history of earning coaches' trust. Devin Singletary is pretty interesting, right? He's behind a rookie or, a second-year player, but a guy who, as a rookie, was good, but like Dameon Pierce didn't actually rate very well in success rate last year. He's kind of more like he breaks tackles. He does stuff that we like to see that's fun, but like as a pure like get what's blocked north-south guy, he's maybe not that great.
Yeah.
And Devin Singletary is like also definitely not that great, but he's on an offense that has a history of a rotation at running back. He's a solid pass blocker, not going to get a rookie quarterback killed, probably going to earn those third down snaps over Dameon Pierce pretty easily, I would think. And then like, what if he's in a true 50-50 split with Dameon Pierce? And Pierce is kind of like your early down explosiveness guy, but like Singletary's just out there more than we want. Like they're like, get Singletary off the field. This sucks. But
like they're going to put that on his tombstone. Devin Singletary. He was just on the field so much more than we thought.
Yeah. He's like a rich man's Daria Gumbawale, I don't want to oversell Devin Singletary here. He's not very good, but
you look up every third down, you're like, Dare is out there. Like, what the fuck is going on? That's kind of when Singletary had that stretch run 2 years ago for the Bills, right? It was Zach Moss ain't it. We don't really have anybody else. They're like, we trust him. He's not very good, but we trust him. That's why P. Ryan has made this long career out of it. Nobody's like, oh yeah, can't wait to give Samaje P. Ryan 25 touches today. But it's like, he's not going to get our quarterback killed. He's going to be in the right places. He knows protections. He's going to get what's blocked for him. And that's good enough.
Yep. And he's got an ADP of 163.5. He's going right behind Deontay Foreman. So your second Houston guy is going after your third Bears guy.
Yeah.
Like those offenses might be pretty comparable in terms of the points they score this year. That wouldn't shock me.
Did you know that Dare is on Houston when you said that? Was that on your screen? He's on.
Honestly, no, I didn't. I thought Dare might be done. I thought Dare was out of the league, to be honest.
Mike Boone and Dare Ogunbowale are the third and fourth running backs on the Houston Texans. So I feel pretty safe about Devin Singletary's job.
Me too. And Ogunbowale has made a career of he's a special teams contributor and he can kind of be out there and do pass blocking stuff, but maybe this gets gross. Maybe they bring in Boone as like a third guy and they rotate it. But I don't think so. I think it's probably more Pierce and Singletary splitting this up. And
he got hurt last year too, I think.
Yeah, he did. Because he had his chance there. I bid on him on waivers in Denver. It didn't work. Did not work. But that's one. I think right now, especially, I like these guys that have the clear backup job locked up. Jaylen Warren is kind of going to continue to rise, I think, as people realize that like he is the obvious handcuff and like I think he's probably better than Najee Harris straight up.
Right.
But we'll see if the coaches come to that realization or not. Chuba Hubbard is another guy. I've actually been shocked that Chuba has not risen a ton because like I feel like we're all sort of talking about him.
He's rising, but I thought it would be a lot faster because he just felt like these other guys. I check. I like all these guys that you're mentioning, but they were like still, even though we think they're underpriced, they were like 3 or 4 rounds before Chuba. Chuba was available in the 18th for a while, the 17th for a long time, and he's moving up, but it's not as quick as I kind of expected it to, and I feel like I'm missing something.
This is to me, I think what you're missing maybe is like that the team is going to be really complimentary of Miles Sanders and talk about him like he's a 3-down back, but he's not, you know, and I don't think you can't pay someone to do something they're not good at. And you can't, you know, just like hype someone up into being a 3-down back if they're not a 3-down back. Like
Right.
he just isn't. And I don't think Sanders is that good. I think Sanders is fine. But like in terms of who is actually just like a better running back, like I think these guys are both like totally fine NFL running backs. I don't think, you know, they're both like, you're happy to have them. You know, they're help filling out your room. As a starter, they're below average, but you know, as a number 2, both are really good. I think Chuba's a pretty good number 2. I mean, he flashed a lot last year. He was right there with Foreman in terms of what he was doing with efficiency and everything. So, you know, I think with the Panthers, we're going to continue hearing that they love Miles Sanders. They plan, Eagles totally underutilized him in the receiving game. We love him. 3 down. He's going to be out there all the time. Like, great. I'm going to be betting against that all summer. Like, that's just not who Miles Sanders has ever been. Kind of that's just a real easy one for me. Not to say like you can't ever take Miles Sanders. I have taken Miles Sanders. I think especially when he falls more to that like 6th round range and you don't have a running back yet.
Overpriced. Yeah, I think
he's a little overpriced. But if he falls and I need a running back, I'm not Xing him out. But I just, you know, like people have talked about the dead zone being dead. Like, not when Miles Sanders in the 5th round, man. He is like he is the prototype. He's the prototype.
He's Mike Davis. Remember Mike Davis? The you know, where we're just like bad offense. They brought this guy in.
We're never going to have a running back dead zone fade as easy as the Mike Davis one. That one was too good, but
it's just wait.
It is close. It's close to the Mike Davis one.
It's a similar idea. I mean, both free agent new guys that are fine. Mike Davis was fine, right? He did it with the Panthers, ironically. You know, they're fine. But like that's the point. Is you're drafting this guy in the 5th round because he's fine and the offense stinks, and they're going to give him the ball. Like that Chuba is a fun one. So I'll also fully admit bias. I've told you this before. Like I do watch a lot of college football. I play college football DFS is probably one of my favorite forms of DFS. And so these guys that pop up on there, you know, generally will maybe win my heart a little bit. But I also have a definitely a bias, but somewhat of a belief in the guys that produce early in college and either like pop as a true sophomore and can't come out yet, or maybe go back to school. So this is what happened with Cedric Tillman, is that if Cedric Tillman had come out the year before, I'm not saying he would have went much higher because he still kind of went high because the wide receiver class wasn't very great, particularly with bigger guys. But like, I think he would be viewed just generally a little bit different if he had come out the year before. Chuba was actually kind of like that as a running back. As a sophomore, this dude had 2,000 rushing yards, almost 2,100. He was like one of the most fun college football players like that existed. He was dominant at Oklahoma State. Comes back, and I think it was the COVID year was when he came back. Got hurt, plus it's the COVID stuff. Only played 7 games. He was fine, but like not anywhere near as good. Like the team wasn't very good, and he wasn't quite as good. And you're like, Jesus, the guy was the best running back in college football as a sophomore, and then comes back and like, not so good. And so like, I just latch onto those guys. Sam Howell was part of why I like him. It was a little bit that way. You're like, oh my God, his sophomore year was unreal. And then the senior year, the team's kind of stinks, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I just like some of those guys. And I think we're seeing Chuba, he fell to a little bit in the draft and then didn't get much of a chance, obviously, behind Christian McCaffrey. And then, boom, gets a chance. And we're like, yep. This is that talented dude that ran for 2,100 yards in the Big 12. Like, this is that guy. And I don't think Miles Sanders is that much different than Chuba is. So I don't agree. That's a different level of uncertainty, though, right? Like, the uncertainty isn't in his role even or anything. The uncertainty is in that everybody has given Miles Sanders 90% of this work when, like, is that really going to be the case?
Right. And you get to make the bet. Again, the price thing is just so, like, if I think these guys are fairly comparable as actual NFL talents, which I do, then I'm getting just a massive discount. And like, yeah, I'm losing week 1 snaps and I'm losing probably week 8 snaps, but like I could get, I think one of the reasons why like the talent stuff, I still think like talent evaluation matters a lot at the running back position. One reason I think that is that like what is your contingency bet? You know, how does your contingency bet play out? Like Christian McCaffrey, right? Provided he hasn't like lost a step this year. If he's hurt with, you know, let's say hamstring or whatever, or some kind of like thigh thing, you know, not something that's going to linger. It's not a high ankle sprain. Let's say it's a elbow, tweaked his elbow. His legs are still great. Okay. He misses 3 games. He's going to come back and take back his job. There's like really no question that he's going to come back and take back his job, even if the other guys are playing really well behind him. And a lot of the early round running backs are like that. You know, they're going to get their jobs back because they're really talented. And they're not like the backups aren't going to be able to change the coaches' minds in a big way. You know, like Nick Chubb, again, provided he's the same Nick Chubb we're used to, Jerome Ford is not going to convince the Cleveland Browns that like we're starting the wrong guy. Like that's just not going to happen. Right. So when we say that Jerome Ford's like a contingent play, we mean like Nick Chubb has to be out for like that game, whatever game you need or whatever stretch or what, like, like Nick Chubb has to be out or Jerome Ford has to like break off a long touchdown, like, you know, on a few touches. But I think when you look at some of these dead zone backs, why it can be appealing to target the running backs behind them, like Jaylen Warren's pretty appealing because Najee Harris, we're like, he's fallen to the 4th round sometimes. How talented is this guy? Like, we're not convinced he's that talented, even though we think he's going to get a lot of touches. Like, that's like a real red flag. The market is telling you, we don't even think this guy's very good. We just think he's going to get work. That's kind of a classic dead zone archetype. Najee Harris, I would say, is, again, another prototypical example of a dead zone back. Getting the back behind him is pretty interesting because, like, what if Najee Harris were to miss 3 games? Does he come back and take back all the work? Or is it more of a Joe Mixon thing last year where they're like, we kind of like how this was going. Maybe we keep the Jaylen Warren, not to say Jaylen Warren would be like the starter, but all of a sudden it's a 60-40, you know, or it's a 55-45, still favoring Harris, but a lot more Warren involved. And I think this situation just strikes me as one where like, yeah, oh man, Miles Sanders, he's so great. Well, you know, it's been a few years since they've hung out with Miles Sanders for any lengthy stretch of time. You know, they might have like, well, this you know, this guy isn't the guy we remember, actually. He's a little older. And after 3 games of Chuba Hubbard getting a chance, we think, like, maybe we just stick with this guy. He's doing better. And I also think that Hubbard is interesting because last year he had 1.55 yards per route run, which is pretty good. He had 0.98 as a rookie. He's at 1.20 for his career. That's like a pretty solid number. That is basically like if you were going to defend Miles Sanders as a pass catcher, you would say he had 1.53 yards per out run as a rookie. But Hubbard was slightly better than that last year. And Sanders is coming off 3 horrific seasons following his rookie year as a pass catcher. 0.67 as a sophomore, 0.84, and then fell all the way down to 0.28 last year, which is like the worst in the league. If you look at the last 3 seasons in ESPN's open score, not open score, their overall receiver ratings at the running back position, and just for comparison over the last 3 years, Christian McCaffrey's first, Kareem Hunt, Austin Eckler, Cordell Patterson, James White. So I think this like does a pretty good job of capturing, you know, that top 5 is like kind of feels intuitive anyway.
Yep.
You go down to the bottom of the list. Melvin Gordon is at 50th, Ezekiel Elliott 51st, Miles Sanders 52nd, Jeff Wilson 53rd. I mean, the guy's been the definition of a back who is susceptible to a back starting to eat in on the 3rd down receiving stuff. So that's where I'm like, hey, I'm getting kind of 2 cracks at it with a guy like Hubbard. Like maybe he just takes over the 3rd down role and then continues to push Sanders out, no matter how much. I mean, I know I'm getting the buzz all summer. Oh, they love him. They love him so much. He's so great. He's doing everything. Oh, you'd be shocked to see how good he's doing in these receiving drills. Like the Eagles just totally blew it. The dumb Eagles who don't know what they're doing just completely blew it.
Eagles.
The stupid Eagles. I mean, I'm ready for a whole summer. I can't wait. I'm getting my popcorn out. I'm delighted. But I think Hubbard to me he's a similar bet to Warren, and I like both those bets a ton.
The Panthers, who overpaid Miles Sanders, overpaid Adam Thielen, have the worst wide receiver room in the history of football, traded up to give away DJ Moore for a quarterback that, like, I'm Bryce is fine, but like, what's the difference between
Man
Bryce
who
and who you're
traded
getting?
for Carson Wentz, Rip's team who traded away Carson Wentz.
Yeah. This team has 4 running backs just as good as your running backs, and they all combined make less than Miles Sanders does total on his contract. So yes, them telling the Eagles they're idiots is going to be very, very appealing. Let's wrap super quickly, not on all the rookies, but just a collective, because we got a bunch of new rookie quarterbacks, and we get new rookie quarterbacks every single year. But I feel like this one is particularly interesting because I find myself, I'm curious how you are, not very interested in drafting any of these guys besides Anthony Richardson. And we discussed kind of some pros and cons to Anthony Richardson at his cost earlier. But I also am not sure that I'm effectively weighing the potential, upgrade that a guy like Bryce Young is to the Panthers, that a guy like CJ Stroud is over Davis Mills and Jeff Driscoll for the Texans and those kinds of things. So how are you looking
an offensive
at those?
coordinator upgrade, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, Pep Hamilton's whatever, but this system, this Shanahan system could be pretty efficient.
So how are you thinking about let's just do those Bryce, Stroud, and Richardson in terms of like what the team level impact is? Because I think, right, the Texans are very cheap. The Panthers outside of Miles Sanders are very, very cheap. The Colts outside of Jonathan Taylor and obviously AR himself are very, very cheap. And it's like, we're all just assuming these teams still suck, but they have new, really expensive rookie quarterbacks. If any of those guys are good, there could be a lot of juice to squeeze out of this, but the market definitely does not think so.
Yeah. And Jonathan Taylor's falling. And I think, he's falling partly because the pass catching stuff is not going to be there for him. But I don't know. I mean, I think he's probably the best breakaway runner in the league right now. Nick Chubb would have something to say about that, I guess. But I mean, he's an incredible talent, and specifically as a rusher. I mean, what he does best is as a rusher. Mm-hmm. He can handle a huge workload. I think it could be a real bounce back season for Jonathan Taylor as a rusher. So I'm still into him. I like that he's falling. I mean, maybe I'll push it a little bit more and start to see if I can get more of that like mid-second JT and not around the 1-2 turn. But, I think I've talked myself out of Garrett Wilson a little bit in this episode. So we'll have to, maybe I'll just hammer Amon-Ra. That's how I handle it. But
the really sneaky CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra pairing. Try that out. Nobody will
what? Oh, they play each other? Yeah. I have done it though. I know,
me too. You gotta have some of it.
You gotta have some of it. We should next week we should talk about ownership stuff, because I kind of think we might disagree a little bit on this ownership stuff. So that'd be a good topic. But the Colts. I mean, I don't love Pittman. I think Pittman is maybe stands to get hurt the most from a quarterback who's gonna not have a ton of passing volume. He's kind of more of an intermediate type of possession guy. But I do still take some Pittman because he is falling a bit. He's in a range where I don't love the other receiver options. Get to a point where I'm like, am I taking Pittman or JSN? Like, I mean, Pittman's going to be the number one, and maybe his ADOT increases. He was okay. I think as a rookie at a bit of a higher ADOT, and then it came down, and he was okay. So I don't want to be out on him. And Alec Pierce is kind of my favorite way to play it. That he'll be out there running routes for sure, and he was pretty good as a rookie. He wasn't great, but he's more of a deep threat.
I still believe he's a really good deep threat. I know he wasn't amazing last year, but like, I can't get, again, I have biases. I'm human. Okay. I can't get watching him in the college football playoffs cooking up Alabama, like corners and safeties and stuff and getting wide open. And this is also why I hate Ritter. Desmond Ritter was his quarterback, and the dude's wide open in the college football playoffs, and Ritter is tinkling down his legs and doesn't even look downfield and get Pierce the ball. So I think Pierce can play, and he could be the right archetype to fit with AR.
Yeah, he's the right archetype for cheap. Yeah. Pittman, by the way, had a 10.3 ADOT as a sophomore. That's what I was remembering. He's mostly the 8.8 career. He's mostly been more of kind of even an underneath-ish type of guy, but more of a possession type of guy on the outside. But maybe 10.3 ADOT would be pretty interesting with Anthony Richardson. But anyway, that's kind of how I'm playing it. Josh Downs, I would take as like a last round guy. I'd be happy to get him there. But like, I think that the market on Downs and Hyatt has just not corrected. Like they were drafted in the 3rd round. They're not who we thought they were in terms of prospects. The NFL's told us that, and we're like, yeah, shut up. Like why is Cedric Tillman totally free and these guys are still kind of where they were pre-draft? So I sometimes will take Downs because sometimes I'll just go, I'm going to take Anthony Richardson and get Alec Pierce later. But then if that doesn't happen, I have taken Downs. Or I will sometimes double stack it if I get a good price on Downs. But I also have taken a lot of Jelani Woods, and I think that could end up being bad because his routes might not be there. But big man could catch another pass, could catch a touchdown pass from another big man. It just seems fun.
You can't hate on him because of the price and the position, of course, but he definitely feels very much like one of those guys where clearly, he's huge, he's athletic as hell. And it's Kylan Granson and Mo Alley Cox that are in his way. Like nobody cares about those guys. And so you can just tell yourself like, oh yeah, like this dude, look at all the upside. But like, then when we get to the end of the year next year, like you said, he ran 30% of the routes. And
yeah, it could easily be, I would say like, it's probably the most likely scenario is that it's like 45, 35, 20 for those 3 tight ends or whatever.
Exactly. Mo Alley Cox is going to play because he's a blocker. He's a beast of a blocker. So the other guys got to figure out how to chop up the routes. And last year, it was a little more Granson, a little less Jelani, and maybe that flips or something. But we're still looking at like a 3-way tight end committee, which is not a lot of fun.
Yeah. I like the Panthers stuff though, and I like the Texans stuff because both those guys are cheap. Basically, I'm betting on all 3 of the rookies, although I don't think that you have to so one thing I did in a draft recently, I think this was the Chow Chow. I've done one Chow Chow. I think this was the draft. But I got kind of boxed out of quarterback, and I had Daniel Jones, and then I had I think I maybe took Stafford, so I'm like, oh God, I did the thing where I've got the guys in the same game. Don't love that. But I then took I took Jonathan Mingo, and then I took DJ Chark, and I didn't then take Bryce Young way ahead of ADP because the way the board lined up, I had to either take him way ahead of ADP or risk missing him, and I was just like, I'm going to risk missing him, and I did miss him, and I think it's fine. Like I don't mind going. I do a lot of Carolina stuff where if I get Bryce Young, great. If I don't get Bryce Young, who cares? But just like a competent quarterback who's keeping the offense moving could be really good for a number of different players on Carolina, and they're all very cheap. So, and I feel the same way about Stroud, although Stroud goes so much later than Bryce Young that I end up with him more. I maybe shouldn't say that. I think my exposure is probably pretty even, but it's just easier if you're like, oh, I think I'll get Bryce Young. He gets sniped from you a little bit more often. Compared to Stroud. I think Stroud, if you want to line up Stroud, you can usually get him because also he gets into a range in the draft where you're like, okay, great. I'll take him at 159 instead of whatever, 160s ADP he's got.
I just really like kind of what you said. I actually don't take those quarterbacks a lot, but I am targeting those teams. And I don't want to say I won't end up taking those. It's just how it has played out so far. And my exposures are a little wonky because I haven't drafted a ton, and 40 of the 80 teams are these kind of experimental teams. So it's probably
you gotta sort those out, man. Well, your tools can do that.
Yeah, we can do that. But I haven't drafted a ton of other teams, so I don't even want to use just a set of 15 teams to say here's what I'm doing in drafts. It's no, I'm 1% of the way to where we're going to be later. Let's not get overboard. But my kind of take on those teams, mostly the Panthers and the Texans, is basically what you said, where if you want to take those guys, but by all means, they're cheap, really highly drafted rookie quarterbacks. That's generally a pretty good thing. But I also don't feel like in order to profit off of what they bring to the offenses, you don't have to draft them. You can just draft, DJ Chark, Jonathan Mingo, Hayden Hurst. I also like the Panthers because I can bet against Adam Thielen. It's like a double, okay, Bryce Young's going to help improve this help improve this offense. And I know I don't want to draft Adam Thielen. So I got all these other cheap guys I can take as like another way for me to get there. The Texans are a little bit trickier. Nico Collins is definitely the clear guy. And part of one of my experiments was, I said, drafting hyper fragile teams, and you'll find Nico Collins being a linchpin in the 130s of you get to round 11 or 12 or whatever. And it's, oh shit, my wide receivers suck. Here's Nico Collins. But the Texans also look really interesting to me. I think you can make a case for Dalton Schultz if CJ Stroud does elevate this offense. If he can take all the routes, that's an issue, of course, but we've kind of seen him do it in the past. John Mechie is you want to talk about uncertainty. He might be the most uncertain player like in the history of fantasy football, coming off, that illness. But second round pick, doesn't really have any competition in front of him, right? And then the dusty Robert Woods
kind of does. Because he got there's Woods and
Tank
and Tank Dell. So this is a super uncertain situation.
Those? Yeah, how are you playing those outside of Nico? How are you kind of playing thinking about the Texans offense? Running backs, because you talked about those already.
Yeah, I've mostly been doing Nico, Singletary, and Stroud because I'm like I like Stroud as I checked and I'm at 9% Stroud. I'm actually 14% Young, so I am taking more Young, and I like Young better. But Stroud is so much cheaper that you can go, well, I'll tack him on as my quarterback too if I have an elite or whatever. But I haven't been taking a ton of Mechie. New coaching staff, and I guess that doesn't matter. Same GM, so maybe that doesn't impact it quite as much. I wasn't super psyched on Mechie as a prospect, although it was a second round pick. But Tank Dell coming in, I'm like, these guys feel kind of duplicative. So which one's going to be, and I don't know. I have just been kind of leaning Dell. Stroud asked for Dell. That seems good, Yeah. But Tank Dell is kind of an interesting prospect, but it's just really small. So I probably need to mix that one up more. I probably need to take more Mechie and just spread my bet out. Because I think, and I like Nico Collins a lot. I'm a big fan of him. He's going to be, I've got 22% of him in my post NFL draft stuff on Underdog. So I'm clearly pretty in, but that is an uncertain situation with the overall pass catchers. I mean, it could easily be the case that Woods isn't that old, and he's coming off an ACL tear, and it's 2 years ago now that he had the ACL tear, but we're doing stuff for Godwin was better at the end of the season, with his ACL tear. Remember Cooper Kupp, one of the reasons that we probably weren't as excited about Cooper Kupp entering his breakout season is that he was coming off an ACL tear the previous year, right? We didn't realize just how good he was because he was still getting back from injury.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm not saying I'm actually slightly nauseous making the comparison to breakout Cooper Kupp with aging Robert Woods.
I was just going to let you keep going. I was just going to let you keep going. See if we can get a clip here.
Yeah, let's clip this up and ruin my life. Robert Woods is 31 years old. He's now 2 years removed from an ACL tear. He's entering an offense that should be, pretty well designed. He's with a rookie quarterback, so he's not going to have a great year or anything. But I do feel like there could he's not Thielen to me. Thielen's actually, I think maybe significantly worse at this point in his career than Robert Woods.
You'll never be able to convince me that Thielen is not completely and utterly stone dust. There's nothing. There's no data. There's no film. There's nothing that's going to make me think that he is completely still a competent wide receiver. You could convince me about that with Robert Woods. You kind of are right now. So I agree. I would not treat them the same.
So ESPN's open score, Robert Woods last year finished 15th among wide receivers. Just behind. So 13th was Garrett Wilson, 14th was Christian Watson, 15th Robert Woods, 16th Drake London, 17th Jamar Chase, 18th T Higgins, tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was in a pretty good cluster of dudes. This is not a guy who's I think maybe complete dust. I've taken some Robert Woods. I'm actually convincing myself to take some more. I forget what his contract was, but it wasn't nothing, right? By the way, Adam Thielen was wide receiver 52. Meaningfully worse. So, and his yards per hour and everything have just like cratered. He's kind of flashing all the signs of a guy who's basically dust. He's also turning 33 in August, where Robert Woods turned 31 in March. So he's essentially 2 full years younger than Thielen. And this is kind of a range of the career where it's like a 31-year-old receiver versus a 33-year-old receiver historically has been like a pretty different bet. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're into dusty wide receivers in uncertain receiver rooms with rookie quarterbacks, let's take some Robert Woods. Huh? Let me put down that Adam Thielen. That's a 13th round pick, man. Let me show you something I got in the back. In the 20th round, I can give you some Robert Woods. Honestly, a better bet.
I'm wrong about plenty of things, but Adam Thielen's price, 134 ADP, is like one of the most absurd things. I think. I guess the wide receiver rush is so crazy that people just don't know what to do after. Like I use that Bateman line. Like honestly, once we get past Bateman, it's like everybody's just throwing right. Well, let's throw all the veterans. Let's throw the kitchen sink at the way. Juju and Jacoby Myers, right, and then we'll toss some Chiefs in there, and we'll toss Thielen in there, and we'll toss because we just don't know what to do right there. So that's probably driving it, and he has a name and a potential role, but I agree. You've kind of talked me into a little bit of Robert Woods. He did sign a 2-year, $15.25 million contract with $10 million guaranteed and incentives that can take him up to $17 million over these next 2 seasons. So it's a pretty real
good deal given what he did last year. He can't really be cut. He's got $10 million in dead cap, which is about twice his cap hit this year. So he will be on the team.
Yep.
It's sort of a similar thing to Thielen, where like Thielen signed $14 million guaranteed, $25 million contract over 3 years, which is an absolute travesty to hand out to a 33-year-old wide receiver. I mean, again, like keep in mind, we're going to be hearing, oh, Thielen, he's so spry, he's so smooth, getting open at will. We're going to hear all of that stuff. And, that's just like, to me, I'm just going to be happy to fade that. Like there's a lot of noise in training camp. Generally teams that bring in free agents and draft guys like those guys and are going to talk them up and stuff.
Everyone except Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan is going to do the opposite. Everyone else is going to hype up their new guys. Like that's just what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I am aware that Adam Thielen signed a big contract. I know that it has guaranteed money, and I'm going to fade the ever living shit out of him. And I can't wait. I mean, the guy, I think he's just done, and I don't think money can fix being dust. You can't pay that away. So, I mean, just so in his prime, 2018, 2.1 yards per out run, drops to 2.08, drops to 1.86, drops to 1.63. Last year dropped to 1.08, playing alongside Justin Jefferson. I mean, that is brutal. That's like the type of efficiency that we like write rookies off for, that's like reevaluate level of inefficiency. And again, was not getting open particularly well. That's kind of what Adam Thielen's really supposed to do, right? He's not ever been like super explosive. He's more of a technician. Right. And by the way, he's turning 33. Like, it's not like, oh, he's coming off a bad year, he'll bounce back. His price is, there's been a couple people nominated. I know Davis Maddox's been nominating people for worst guy on the board. I think Adam Thielen's worst value on the board. Not particularly close.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm becoming less of I'm taking a hard fade on guys. I guess I'm getting older and maybe less stubborn or whatever. I have a handful of guys I really like to flag plant, and then just a handful of guys I really want to fade, and then everybody else kind of fits into how much are you going to draft of this guy. And Thielen is going to be one of the very few, like, I don't care. I'm not taking him. I don't care. I'm not drafting him. He's going to be a hard fade. But I do think, I'm glad we talked about those couple of situations, because they're a little bit of a form of a different level of uncertainty, in that we also have this path in these offenses where we don't really know who it is. Like, we're assuming it's Nico Collins, but it could be Robert Woods. It could be John Mechie. It could be Tank Dell. It could just be Dalton Schultz. It could be, we don't know. It could be nobody because the offense stinks. But it also could be, I don't know. What if Stroud's good? What if Robert Woods bounces back? What if Schultz is actually good? What if Tank Dell's good? What if Mechie's good? And the next thing you know, this offense is just much better than we expect it to be too, right? There's like all these forms of uncertainty around these kinds of teams. I'm more bullish on the Texans, even though I like Bryce Young better as a player than CJ Stroud. I think the collection of kind of talent and the way that they spent their money is a little better in Houston. I'm not a big, we just talked about Thielen, but even then, like Mingo and Hurst and DJ Chark and Miles Sanders, I just can't really figure out what the Panthers were doing. But also, that's my personal bias. That doesn't mean that I'm right either, And so these two offenses have uncertainty in who the heck is even going to get the ball on Houston, who's going to play. We don't even know exactly who's going to run routes. And then we have uncertainty into like, how good are they? How bad are they? How, where do they rank? And those can be really appealing situations. I think a lot of the times people will, instead of embracing some of that, people will go the opposite way. And they'll say, that offense stinks. I'm going to fade them. Or I'm only going to draft Nico because I know what Nico is. And like, oftentimes that ends up not being the way you want to play it. And that's the way that a lot of other people play it. And so you're doing the same thing everybody else is doing and not trying to kind of exploit maybe a potential gap in the market. And usually it's on like last year's Texans, right? With Davis Mills, like we don't really have paths to Davis Mills taking this offense to new heights. This year, these offenses, these quarterbacks, this is not Davis Mills. These are good, young, talented quarterbacks. So I do think it's different.
Yeah. And I think in both cases, you got offenses. There's different versions of bad offenses, right? Like there's bad offenses that are going to be very inefficient at scoring points, but then also like might be sort of ambivalent about scoring points.
Yeah.
Unless, we're talking about the very end of the season where Lovie Smith really wants to stick it to the Texans. They're not like even trying to win that bad. It's like yes, of course they're trying to win. But what are they really trying to do? They're trying to not get embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
Friendly losses are fine, right? The Bears last year played for a bunch of friendly losses. Don't get us fired. Let's not get fired.
Correct.
Let's figure
Run
out
the
we're
ball,
going to get the number one
shorten
pick.
This
maybe.
game. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Shorten the game. Exactly. Limit the number of plays run. We're going to see this out of Tampa Bay, I think, a lot this year. We're going to see this out of the Cardinals early on in the season. Just
Definitely.
get us. Let's go home. Let's go home. Oh no, we lost by 7. What a bummer. And then meanwhile, you're kind of smiling a little bit if you're if you're running one of these franchises, I think, because you're just trying. They're trying to keep your job. Obviously, they're not going to fire what's the dude's name? The not Steichen or Steichen, Shane Waldron.
Yeah,
Shane Waldron. Yeah, he's not going to be on the hot seat right away, but I think if you're Bowles, you're thinking about that a lot. You're thinking about, how do I not get embarrassed this week? The Panthers and the Texans have graduated from let's not get embarrassed to let's see what we got. Let's see what we got in these rookies. So I think you could have, again, maybe the rookie quarterbacks hit, maybe they don't hit, but I think there could be pieces on these offenses that are fun. I think the offense as a whole could score points, could hang in games, could stick around, could be kind of like a frisky team down the stretch, maybe. Like, oh, the Panthers, they're not going to roll over. Or the same. You could say the same for the Texans, right? Like the Bucks.
Two worst divisions. Two worst division. All include AR is also included in this conversation. These are the two worst divisions in football, probably bar none. Jaguars, the very clear favorite on the AFC side. The Titans are. We could record a whole episode about the disaster that is the Tennessee Titans.
That's another one that they could easily be playing for friendly losses. And I like Burks, but. We could be looking at very low play volume out of the Titans.
And like you said, these other teams have kind of graduated out of that. The Panthers in particular, all of their moves are like the Texans. Yeah, they did Robert Woods, but like they really didn't do a lot. They're still very clear, like in a bit of a rebuild. Now, like you said, they're going to try to win some games for sure. But they didn't do anything like totally crazy in terms of kind of trying to win too quickly. When you pay Miles Sanders and Adam Thielen and Hayden Hurst and DJ Chark and all these guys. Like the Panthers are, I think, trying to win. And I don't even think that that's wrong necessarily. That division is horrible. They could absolutely win that division. And the thing that's always been the most exciting to me about the Panthers, like real life football, is they put together like some really talented, like a collection of talented defensive players. They got banged up last year, and you saw what happened when Brady just throws for 1,000,000 yards on them because everybody was hurt. But their defense, they've loaded up draft picks on their defense and their offensive line, which is like kind of really smart actually. So now they just said, we're pretty good actually in those spots. Let's just go get these veteran guys to give Bryce some weapons. And I don't know that they even gave him any weapons, but I think that they're trying to win is the whole thesis of the thing. That you don't have to worry about that with these teams, I don't think. But even like last year you did with Carolina, they were trying to run the ball and let's get the hell home because we can only throw it to DJ Moore so many times. None of these other losers can get open, and it's Sam Darnold as the quarterback again. They didn't care to win.
Yeah, no, I mean they wanted to win, but if they also lost by 3, like, okay, that's fine too.
Exactly.
It's not as bad. It's like one of those things. Like I'm not like questioning whether or not they were like actually playing like competitive football or throwing games or anything. What I'm saying is the risk of losing by 14 was not worth it to those staffs. And my read on it is that like they're trying to tighten games up, let the ball bounce a couple times. Hopefully it bounces our way. If it doesn't bounce our way, so be it. But we're not going to go out there and go toe to toe with people and risk getting blown out and then, getting fired mid-season. We're not trying to be the Colts here. I'm not trying to get replaced by Colin Cowherd, as the new head coach, just hire whatever ESPN guy.
Yeah, I had honestly totally forgot about that too. What an absolute shit show. But we have.
Wait, can I do one more? I know we're over 2 hours now. We do one more because
Yes.
I think actually this one's pretty interesting.
Okay.
So we talk about worst value on the board. That got me thinking. Is there anyone else that comes to mind? And I really do think that Thielen is gonna stick as my pick for worst value. One guy that I am really behind on ADP is Odell Beckham. But even though I think I'm even further behind ADP on Odell Beckham than I am on Adam Thielen, I would say he's not a worse value than Adam Thielen because there is that small chance that he's actually recovered from the ACL now. He's young enough. He was at his peak better than Thielen. That was a long time ago, and he's probably never going to be that guy again. But there's like a chance that he is actually pretty good still. He's not that old. What is he? He's 30 years old. He turns 31 in November. So more the Woods type thing than the Thielen type thing. Might have a little left in the tank. And tied to not a rookie quarterback, but Lamar Jackson on a new contract in an offense that might be passing the ball more. So to me, Beckham is one of those Toney types of dudes where I'm like, I don't like this price at all.
Yep.
Do I want to completely fade it? I don't, because the times it hits, it could really, really hurt me if I don't have any. But you're also looking at Zay Flowers there. You're also looking at Rashad Bateman there. You've got 3 wide receivers who are going in the late single-digit rounds, and they're all going to be competing to be the number 1 wide receiver on what could be an explosive offense, and which could be not, I would say, pass first offense, but they could be a balanced offense. They could be, more like in the Dolphins, maybe not quite the Dolphins. Let's say, maybe slightly behind the Rams in terms of their like approach to the game, pass rate over expected. The Rams were so bad last year, they passed a lot, but like that's kind of how the Cowboys approach things, like that level, not like full blown Bears, Falcons, more of a balanced approach than we've typically seen from the Ravens anyway. Yes, Mark Andrews is the number 1 pass catcher there, but to get the number 1 wide receiver, even if he is behind a tight end, like the tight end isn't generally going to hog as many targets as an alpha as a top receiver will. So there is still it's being the number 1 wide receiver behind a number 1 tight end is still better than being the number 2 receiver in a lot of cases.
Exactly. Even Travis Kelce doesn't demand the same level of like we look at Travis Kelce, as the epitome of what an elite alpha tight end does. he's a 24% target share ish guy
Right.
generally.
Right.
I think that's what we projected him for this year, which is big, but like that's not stopping Rashad Bateman or Odell Beckham or Zay Flowers from being, it's not stopping Kadarius Toney from being an absolute smash in fantasy. I'm really glad you brought up Odell, because I feel also we definitely need to talk about something that we disagree on next week, because now we just keep agreeing on all these players and stuff. But Odell and the Thielen thing is so true, because I would almost guarantee the same thing is true for me, that I have Odell further in my ranks behind ADP than I do Thielen, but I will draft Odell and I will not draft Thielen. And it's because of everything that you said. It's also, this goes back to, reminds me a little bit of like the DJ Moore conversation and the 4th round wide receivers. Now Odell's going 110 overall. Zay's going around 90. And Bateman is continuing to move up, and I may pass Zay at a certain point. 94. So you got Zay at 88, Bateman at 94, and Odell's now down at 110, 111. So I think he's going to continue to fall, because I think he was going ahead of those guys, and that was like agreed. Absolutely,
crazy, man.
Absolutely.
I think he still is on DraftKings.
Which is just, so don't do, this is not DraftKings advice. This is underdog. He's now fallen past that, I keep saying, that Bateman line into this just sea of nothingness.
The Elijah Moore sea of nothingness.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so it's next to him: Juju, Odell, Allen Lazard, Tyler Boyd, Jacoby Myers, Darnell Mooney. Stop me when I say someone that makes you excited.
I take Myers sometimes. I'm like,
yeah, but the
veteran wide receiver going to be running routes, and I think he's actually pretty good. And what if Adams were to get traded? Traded?
I should probably take some of him, because of the after Davante comes out, and without saying the words, "You brought me fucking Jimmy G." That's basically what he said he's
looking at Jimmy G, and he's looking at Myers and Hunter Renfrow, and he's like, I am fucked.
Yeah, these
guys, he's gonna love these guys.
He's like, I just got traded to play with my best friend, my college quarterback, last year. It went great. I caught 1 billion passes. I was still Davante Adams. And then they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo to replace this guy, and a bunch of dudes who fit everything that Jimmy Garoppolo does when he throws.
The Jimmy Garoppolo defender's in shambles after Davante Adams takes one look at him and demands a trade. I mean, I think he might be a product of Shanahan. I don't know.
Yeah. If the best receiver in the NFL is like this fucking guy,
a guy who gets open almost immediately, knows it's not quick enough for Jimmy G.
Or even if he's open, he's too far down the field, because Jimmy ain't throwing it all the way down there.
That's right. Hunter Renfrow just
yeah, exactly. Renfrow doing his quadruple deeks or whatever that he got famous for on all the highlights. But that the sentiment is like, let's look at that list of wide receivers there, where Odell is now going.
Yeah.
And he makes sense. You can now get some of him. You drafted Lamar. Maybe you don't get Andrews, Zay, or Bateman. You still have kind of a backstop with Odell, and I still like Isaiah Likely and all that. But as a wide receiver, you still have a backstop with Odell. And there is a story, like you said, in which you can tell. I mean, Odell was still good on the Rams when he was on the Rams. He was not Odell Beckham, but he was still good.
He was still good.
He was still good. And so, like, you can tell yourself that story. It feels gross because, like you said, my in a vacuum take is like,
it's
really
mispriced.
don't want to draft.
It's definitely mispriced, but it's
But you have to take all the other things into account, right? If I'm deciding between him and this Jacoby Myers nonsense, then like I think I can at least tell myself a story I shouldn't have zero, basically.
Well, and if you have Lamar, if you've got Lamar and you didn't get Andrews, and the other thing I think is interesting about those guys is that, like, I think there's a pretty good chance that one of them is a smash, because they're in a range of the draft where you don't need them to be like week in, week out stars, right? This is where Garrett Wilson was an absolute smash, and Garrett Wilson had a few amazing games. He also disappeared at times because Zach Wilson was back on the field, and there's kind of an inconsistency that you can live with Garrett Wilson when he's going in like the 9th round. And I think all of these guys, could deliver, somewhat similar types of game logs to Garrett Wilson. We probably aren't gonna feel that they're like incoming superstars because they're not doing it with terrible quarterback play and overcoming it. They're doing it with Lamar Jackson. But that, Lamar Jackson and this Monken offense, there could be more passing volume. I think Lamar is a pretty good passer, even if he's an amazing runner. So, there's, I think, potential for someone to come out of this pack and be like, oh, you're scrolling the draft of saying, does this, when you look sometimes back at past ADPs, past draft boards, you basically look to see like, did you get this guy in this round?
Yep.
Is what I'm trying to say. And I've talked about this before to the point that I almost didn't explain what the hell I was talking about just now. But that's what I'm saying. You sometimes, when you go look at old draft boards, you're like, did you have Diggs right in his first year with the Bills?
Did you take Andrews in the 5th? Did you take Kupp? Did you take Jacobs last year? Right.
Did you take Garrett Wilson in the 9th? There was like one guy in the 9th you basically wanted. I mean, there's a couple other guys that were fine to take, but like you wanted to see Garrett Wilson in the 9th, Ramondre in the 10th, right? You want to keep going down and see that guy. I think that there's a good chance one of these guys ends up being that guy. And I think it comes at the expense of the others probably, but maybe not entirely. Like I could see like a Lamar triple stack actually paying off. I don't think it's like the most likely thing, but it's priced where it could happen. And certainly it could happen where one of these three receivers plus Andrews plus Lamar is an absolute smash. Absolutely. And I kind of want exposure to definitely the two young guys. And that's why I'm not willing to write off Odell, because maybe he does emerge as the top guy there. It's possible.
Yeah, it's not impossible. And the top guy in that offense is going to be a lot more valuable than the top guy, for the Panthers. And that's just how it projects. Maybe Bryce Young will be, that could be wrong. Bryce Young is the new Drew Brees or something, and he takes this offense to great heights, and that will be wrong. But I also like to put a bow on this one. You can get Zay and Bateman, and I like, because like you said, at that cost, and it's the end of this huge wide receiver tier, like I don't need to hit, like I don't want one of them to fail and one of them to smash, but also if that happens, like I'm still good and I'm covered on both of them. There's multiple paths to winning with both of those guys. You could win with Lamar, without Lamar. You don't have to have Lamar. You you drafted Tyreek and Waddle or in Tua or whatever. You can double tap those guys at that spot too. They fit so many different. They fit every structure, right? Zero RB. They can be closing out some of your wide receivers. Hyper fragile. You're like, oh my God, I need these guys. They fit correlations, Lamar stacks, other stacks, everything. They just fit so perfectly, and so I love that tier specifically.
We're now looking at uncertainty of whether or not this pod will ever end, but it's a really interesting thing. You talk about the bringbacks there, because like, let's say you have Tyreek and Waddle, okay, and you get Tua, and you now like you need that, like that has to pay off. Like those guys have to crush. Not only do they have to crush, but you're going to need one of them to hit your lineup in week 17, most likely. I mean, I suppose there are outcomes where that doesn't happen, but it's very unlikely that both guys don't hit your final lineup. So there are points in the Dolphins and the Ravens in the scenarios where you're winning the $3 million. You want to bring back on that game. I think it probably does make sense to go double bring back, and you're giving yourself two outs to hit, you get Zay, you get Bateman. You might feel like I'm like hurting my ceiling. I need to pick the guy. But I guess like the way I think about that is more like you already landed on the right game. You already landed on the right guys on the other side of the game. You're sitting there. It's week 17. Both those dudes have scored touchdowns. Both of them are nearing in on 100 yards. Two is having an incredible game. And you're sitting there like I've told you that. You have both these guys. This is your team. I'm like, what do you want on the other side? Do you want Bateman or Flowers, or do you want both? I'd be like, give me both. Like,
every time.
I want both, man. Like, give me both. They could both hit. I want one of them to score the points and hit my lineup at these prices. Your 8th round pick doesn't make your final lineup in week 17. So what? That's not going to be the end of it. It's what you need is someone else from that game to be in on the fun and scoring a lot of points. In fact, you're actually hoping, even if you do take both, that one of them fails and one of them crushes. So you want all the points to go to the other guy, right? But I think, and I guess someone could say this is wrong, and maybe in a big enough field, like as the field sizes increase, maybe this would be wrong. But I think in Best Ball Mania in a 441 team field, I think you would prefer to have both, even if you knew that this game was shooting out, and maybe even if you knew that only one of them was going to hit. I still think I'd say give me both then, because I'm gonna get that guy in my lineup. Like, oh my god, like I'll burn that 8th to get that sweet bring back.
Right. And there are also other benefits to it too, right? The week 17 part is the most important part. And like you said, in a total, like people mistake correlations as to always raising your ceiling. And a lot of the times they actually don't, because the pure ceiling, the pure optimal on any given week might be a quarterback to a wide receiver. It's possible there's a bring back on there too, but a lot of times it's just random shit, right?
It's random.
It's completely random.
Whoever scored the most
one-off. Yeah, it's just whoever scores the most points. The correlation is what allows you to beat your opponents and get less things right. It's not necessarily about what's actually raising your pure ceiling. But from a seasonal sense, even if you don't have Lamar, you can bet on both of those wide receivers, and it can be a good thing, right? Because now you still have placed a seasonal long bet on these Ravens. The same thing could happen over the season. One could be a smash and one could suck. That's fine, because you got the smash. The smashes are what win anyway. You're going to have duds. Everybody's going to have duds. They could both be good. Of course, they could both be bad, but that's any player could be bad. They could ping pong weeks, right? And then that's also what could happen in the playoffs. You get to week 15 and 16, and Zay Flowers has big games. So then Bateman doesn't do anything. Then you get to week 17, and now you have both of them. Zay's a little chalky, right? Because he just had a back-to-back 25-point weeks. And now you got Bateman, right? This is T. Higgins. I'm not trying. This is T. Higgins versus Jamar Chase. I'm not trying to say they are that next thing. But like 2 years ago.
Leverage. You're talking about leverage.
T's 25% owned and Chase is 6% owned in the final because T went off. If you drafted both of them, you were able to get there easily, and you had the 6% owned guy that went for 50. Right. And so you're creating natural leverage by pairing them you're setting yourself up to have leverage just by drafting them together. Again, will it happen? This is the same thing. No, probably not. But most of these things are not probably going to happen. The Tua is probably not going to throw for 500 yards. But if he does, I want to set myself up in the scenario that now I'm going to win this whole damn tournament. Right. And that's everything that we
and you've already bet on him throwing for 500 yards, right? Not maybe 500, but you've already bet on him having a huge game. And so it's like he is having a huge game now, right? In this world that you've made, he is having a huge game. Given that knowledge, what else do you want to do? And that's a situation where, like, that is maybe where I would want to take Odell Beckham.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
He's in a dude. This is the game to have. I just spent my first 2 picks on this game. Like, I maybe attack on a Gus Edwards because there's points scored in this game. I know there's points scored in this game. That I know for a fact, because otherwise the team's dead. So who cares?
Exactly. That's people miss that. I think a lot of the times it's like, we have to understand is your team's probably going to be dead anyway. And the questions of, well, what about this? The answer to the, what about this? What about this guy had a bad game, or what about this? Like, you lost
and your team's dead.
You just didn't win. That's the answer is you lost. Guess what? Most of us are probably going to lose. So plan around. I just got lucky. Now, how do I win this tournament when I got lucky, right? Getting lucky is you found the game. Congratulations. Tyreek and Waddle. That's what you needed. You found the game. You got them with Tua. So now how do you build the team for you just got lucky around that? I need the 3 million, right? I don't want to get lucky and get 16th. I want to get lucky and win the whole thing. And I think that's the the biggest and most important part of all this. And that's it actually does. We weren't specifically talking about uncertainty, but that's kind of what it is targeting this uncertain. Do I need both these guys on the bring back? And it's like, yeah, I'm just going to take both of them because I don't know. And there's paths,
right,
there's paths to it paying off regardless of if one of them.
I don't know, but I do know. I don't know who's going to score, but I know that this game's going to shoot out. Because if it doesn't shoot out, then I've wasted the $25. So
yeah,
so it has to shoot out. The game has to shoot out now. I think that the Dolphins Ravens one's the easiest because in a lot of cases you literally have spent your first two picks. Yeah, I mean in some cases you could have spent your first 3 picks, right? If you go double bring back. Well, in this case you definitely want, because if you went Dolphin Lamar.
Then you definitely want both. You
definitely want the receivers later because you don't have Andrews and stuff. But yeah, anyway,
I like I'm just gonna steal that phrase. I don't know, but I do know, which is it actually is very true. That's what this you have no idea, but you know this one thing. I know this one thing, and once I know that one thing, now how do I build?
It's a time machine, right? Once you build that team, it's a time machine. You've taken yourself to week 17. Everything has gone your way to this point. It's amazing. You're crushing. But what else do you want to have done, with the rest of that team? You know that one thing, but what else do you want that team to look like once you've transported yourself to week 17 and you're watching it all come to, holy shit, that stack's actually doing it. It's actually hitting. What else do you want, And I think you want to build, that's like the ultimate kind of draft like you're right type of thing where it's like draft like you're having the best Sunday of your life in early January next year, or I guess it's New Year's Eve, so it's a hell of a New Year's Eve for you.
That will be a hell of a New Year's Eve for somebody.
Honestly, yeah.
Now I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I definitely still want to win. I'm not even sure if my wife will want me to win because she won't.
Well, you don't know, right? You don't know until the following day. So it's a sweat.
Oh
dude.
Yeah. Okay, then definitely that's the worst New Year's Eve.
Let me tell you. Hey, advice for me. If you're in first place closing Sunday night, maybe just skip the Roto World recap podcast. You don't got to host that. You don't have to host that while you sweat Isaiah Likely having scored an early touchdown. And
yes,
it might be a total dagger to close the game. Just see if RotoPack can cover you for that one. Just advice from me.
I also think I will be skipping the family New Year's Eve, get together if I'm sitting on 3 milli heading into there because I will be. It wouldn't be a good time for them. Let's just say it wouldn't be a good time for all my friends and family.
Just let loose and forget everything.
Yeah, I'll just sit in my basement in the moment. My dogs would enjoy it a lot more than my parents would. Let's just say my state of mind at that moment. But we do got to get out of here from this marathon podcast that we brought to you guys. But it's
now week 17.
I'd like to have a time machine for 2.5 hours ago to remind to tell ourselves to not talk. Yeah, to tell ourselves we do have to get some work done before we get out of here. But I did actually really enjoy the conversation, and I have a lot of things spinning, and we already figured out what next week's subject is going to be. Maybe something we can disagree on a little bit more. But before we get out of here, I should have said this at the top. I need to remember this. So if anybody is still somehow listening to this, I'll remember moving forward, I promise. But if you are a Legendary Upside subscriber and you subscribe to Spike Week, you get 40% off. You can subscribe to the monthly package, and for as long as you stay subscribed to both of them, you will get 40% off. And if you want to subscribe to the NFL package, which is $300, you'll get 40% off there. So for
promo code
obviously all promo code leg up, obviously all of Pat's amazing content that he already produces at Legendary Upside, and you can combine it and come bring it over and do some best ball drafts with the Spike Week tools. Like I said, I really got to remember to put that in at the beginning. But was there anything else that you got coming up?
Well, if you're thinking about signing up for Spike Week, or maybe if you did sign up for Spike Week under the new pricing, right? Then you can sign up for Leg Up, and you can get access to this 40% discount from Spike Week, and you get a $30 discount off Leg Up right now. That's running for just through the middle of July, through July 18th, which is a special date. Because that's the date that I drafted my team. So through July 18th, I'm offering $30 off. That takes the price down to $69. You can get that at legendaryupside.com/early.
Awesome. We will be back probably next Thursday to record an episode on some ownership, some projected ownership, some player combinations, and all of that fun stuff. We will see you guys next time. LegendaryUpside.com, SpikeWeek.com. Check out all that. Make sure you take advantage of the link in the description to get your discount on your subscriptions. And we will see you guys next week.
Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there. You can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.